For most of human history, sleep was not the reward that came after safety. It was something the human body attempted before safety had fully arrived. In the dark, on the ground, beneath shifting weather, among insects, animals, strangers, and the fragile sounds of one's own group, rest did not mean protection. It meant a temporary surrender, carefully limited, never fully complete. Long before walls, locks, raised beds, or stable night shelters, the body still had to close its eyes somewhere. That may be the colder truth. Human beings did not first become safe and then learn to sleep. They slept while danger remained unfinished. If that was the condition in which most human lives began and ended, why did 90% of human history sleep without safety? The oldest problem in human sleep may not have been how to rest, but how to surrender without ever being fully protected. A modern room teaches the body a comforting sequence. First the door closes, then the light softens, then the body lets go. Safety appears to come first, and sleep follows behind it. Yet for most of human history, that order was likely reversed. Human beings did not wait for a sealed and reliable world before closing their eyes. They belonged to open ground, changing weather, uncertain shelter, unstable firelight, and the constant presence of other living things. In such conditions, sleep could not have meant the complete absence of threat. It was not a reward given by a controlled environment. It was a biological need that continued even when control was limited. That is where the title of this story begins to make sense. To say that humans slept without safety does not mean every night was a scene of disaster, or that all ancient sleep was terror. It means that for a very long stretch of human existence, sleep happened in settings where protection was partial, fragile, and often shared rather than guaranteed. The body still needed darkness, rest, memory repair, and the slow recovery that comes with sleep. But the surrounding world did not pause to provide ideal conditions. Long before cities, walls, locks, glass windows, raised beds, and climate control, human sleep belonged to a world that remained unfinished at night. The ground held cold and moisture. Air carried smell and sound. The limits of vision changed after sunset. A place good enough for rest might still be exposed, temporary, or dependent on the presence of others nearby. What we call a safe night today is often the product of built layers: architecture, stored fuel, social order, medicine, tools, and habits repeated across generations. Early humans did not begin with those layers. They began with a body that needed sleep anyway. That detail matters because it changes the way we imagine the human past. It is easy to picture sleep as a peaceful, universal constant, something unchanged beneath all cultures and all eras. But the need to sleep is universal in one sense, while the conditions in which sleep happens are deeply historical. A person lying down in a locked house is not only using a mattress. That person is resting inside thousands of years of accumulated separation from wind, darkness, animals, strangers, and uneven ground. Remove those layers one by one, and the meaning of sleep starts to shift. It becomes less private, less sealed, less certain. Near the beginning of human life as a species, that older meaning was likely closer to the norm. Sleep was not the final step after perfect security had been achieved. It was a necessary pause taken inside a world that still moved, still sounded, still cooled, still carried risk. This does not require us to invent dramatic scenes or claim more certainty than the evidence allows. We do not need to imagine every prehistoric night in detail to see the larger point. For most of the time humans have existed, they were not sleeping in the kind of environments modern people now treat as ordinary. Their nights were shaped by exposure more than enclosure, by proximity more than privacy, and by the limits of the body more than the comforts of design. The central paradox is simple and cold. Human sleep evolved not in perfect refuge, but in a world where refuge was incomplete. The body learned to rest not after danger had fully disappeared, but while some part of danger remained unresolved. That older order may be one of the deepest facts hidden beneath modern sleep, even now, when we close our doors and believe the night has finally become still. A sleeping body is never as capable as a waking one. That is true in any century, under any sky, and it becomes more important the farther back we look toward the beginning of human life. To sleep is to accept a temporary narrowing of the senses. The eyes close. Awareness changes. Muscles loosen in different ways. Reaction slows. Attention, which by day can move quickly across distance, sound, and movement, no longer surveys the world with the same sharpness. Even in modern life, this remains the strange bargain of sleep. The body requires it, yet the body also becomes easier to surprise while it is happening. In a fully protected environment, that bargain feels manageable. In the deeper human past, it likely carried a different weight. This does not mean early humans were uniquely fragile, or that they lived in constant panic. It means only that the biological act itself already contained a cost. To rest was to reduce immediate control over the world. For a species whose long history began in open and changeable environments, that reduction could never have been meaningless. The question is not whether sleep was possible. Of course it was possible, because human beings survived and continued. The more revealing question is what sleep could realistically have felt like in conditions where the body remained exposed to ground, weather, sound, temperature, and the presence of many other organisms. Near the start of our species, human life did not unfold inside sealed structures built to preserve a stable night. It unfolded in landscapes where the body was always in some relation to the outside. Under those circumstances, sleep was likely less like entering a separate protected zone and more like lowering oneself partway out of vigilance while still remaining inside the living world. That difference matters because it changes the title from metaphor into biology. To say humans slept without safety is not just to describe the outside environment, it is also to describe the fact that the body itself cannot sleep and guard with equal strength at the same time. One function rises as the other recedes. Sleep restores, but it also compromises. The same nervous system that needs recovery cannot maintain full outward watch forever. So the human condition was never simply to choose between sleep and danger as if one could wait for danger to vanish first. The older condition was that sleep had to happen while some uncertainty remained. Even today, traces of that condition are easy to recognize. A sudden sound at night can wake a person faster than the same sound during the day might command attention. An unfamiliar room often changes how easily sleep arrives. The body can settle, yet not settle completely. These are ordinary experiences, and they do not prove exact prehistoric patterns. But they do remind us that human sleep has never been a magical escape from the body's vulnerability. It is a managed state, not an invincible one. That would have been no less true for people living much closer to the beginning of human history, before long-built layers of nighttime protection became common. The need for sleep came from the body's limits, but the risks of sleep came from those same limits. Early humans inherited no perfect solution to that tension. They inherited a body that had to pass through the night by partially surrendering its powers. If there was any safety in that process, it would often have been incomplete, borrowed from companions, shelter, fire, terrain, or habit, rather than guaranteed by the body alone. This is why the human story of sleep begins not with comfort, but with compromise. The body could not remain awake forever, yet the world did not stop being demanding because the body was tired. Somewhere near the origin point of human life, that simple fact may have shaped every night. Rest was necessary, but the sleeper never ceased to be a vulnerable creature among other vulnerable creatures. The deeper we move into human history, the less useful it becomes to imagine safety as a stable background condition. Modern people often treat safety as something quiet and invisible. When it is present, it disappears from thought. A wall stands, a door locks, a window closes, a familiar room holds the same shape through the night, and the body is allowed to believe that sleep is simply what happens next. But that arrangement is historically unusual. For most of the human story, safety was less like a permanent structure and more like a temporary achievement, made from place, timing, group presence, shelter, fire, and habit, then altered again by darkness, weather, movement, and chance. That does not mean human life was pure instability. It means protection was often partial rather than absolute. A night could be good enough for rest, without becoming fully secure in the modern sense. This distinction is important because it prevents the title from becoming exaggerated. To say humans slept without safety is not to say they slept without any protection at all. It is to say that the conditions surrounding human sleep were rarely total, sealed, or guaranteed for most of our existence as a species. At the beginning of human life, survival depended on using landscapes, reading seasons, staying near others, and adjusting constantly to environments that could not be fully controlled. Sleep entered that reality, not a separate one. It belonged to the same unfinished world as hunger, cold, reproduction, childcare, movement, and injury. So when night came, human beings did not step out of the living environment into a perfectly defended chamber. They remained inside the same broad ecological field, only now with less vision, less mobility, and a body moving toward unconsciousness. That older form of sleep was likely shaped by continuity with the world, not separation from it. The night air was still air from outside. The ground was still part of the landscape. Sound still crossed the boundary between sleeper and surroundings. Other humans nearby were not background details, but part of the conditions that made rest possible at all. Near the origin point of our species, the problem of sleep was therefore never only about the individual body. It was also about how much protection a place, a group, or a moment could provide before complete control became impossible. This is one reason modern sleep can hide the past so effectively. A mattress, a roof, temperature control, indoor light, soft materials, and private rooms make sleep look natural in its safest form. They make it easy to forget that rest once took place in contact with a far more open world. Yet, if those protective layers are historically recent, then the long human baseline was not enclosed sleep, but exposed sleep managed as well as possible. That older baseline may explain why the title sounds strange at first, and then slowly begins to feel almost obvious. Humans did not evolve under nighttime conditions defined by certainty. They evolved under nighttime conditions defined by enough shelter, enough warmth, enough nearness to others, enough temporary advantage to let the body risk shutting down for a while. Safety in that sense was rarely a finished possession. It was a thin margin, and sleep had to fit inside that margin. Once this becomes visible, the question of the video changes shape. It stops being a dramatic claim about ancient fear and becomes a quieter historical observation. The human body that sleeps today in layered protection is descended from bodies that often had much less of it. For most of human history, sleep was not placed at the end of safety. It was placed inside uncertainty and made possible anyway. That may be the most important starting point of all, because everything that follows in the long history of human nights begins there. Not with perfect refuge, but with a body that needed to rest before the world was ever ready to promise it peace. Even in the safest modern bedroom, the body does not become a stone. It remains alive to interruption. A slight sound can travel through sleep. A change in temperature can shift posture without fully waking the mind. An unfamiliar place can make rest feel thinner, lighter, or slower to arrive. These are small and ordinary experiences, but they reveal something important. Human sleep is never a complete disappearance from the world. It is a changed relation to the world. Awareness narrows, muscles release, and the mind passes through its own internal rhythms. Yet the sleeper is still a living animal whose body remains connected to sound, touch, warmth, pressure, and proximity. This matters because the title of the video does not depend only on the outside dangers of ancient life. It also depends on the kind of body humans have always possessed. Near the beginning of our species, that body was already modern in its essential structure. It still needed sleep for restoration, memory, regulation, and survival, but it also still had the same problem it has now. Sleep lowers immediate control. The body does not stop being vulnerable when sleep begins. It simply cannot avoid sleep forever. That is the deeper tension. A human being cannot permanently choose vigilance over rest, because exhaustion itself becomes dangerous. Yet the moment rest begins, some forms of watchfulness weaken. So the human body is never solving the night in a final way. It is negotiating with it. In the long human past, before built environments separated sleepers from cold air, rough ground, insects, passing animals, and uncertain sound, that negotiation was likely more visible than it is today. The body could not withdraw into a fully insulated private space because such spaces were rare or non-existent for most of human history. Sleep therefore remained closer to the edge of the environment. That edge is important. It means the sleeping body was not resting beyond the world but within it, still subject to changing conditions that no closed room had yet erased. This does not require any exaggerated claim about ancient sleep patterns. We do not need to say that early humans were always half awake or that they never slept deeply. The evidence does not allow such certainty. What we can say, more carefully, is that the body humans carried into the prehistoric night was a body that sleeps by surrendering some control, while still depending on enough sensitivity to survive until morning. That balance would have mattered even more near the starting point of human life, when groups lived in immediate relation to weather, darkness, fire, other humans, and the wider animal world. One reason modern people often misunderstand ancient sleep is that we imagine the body as either on or off, awake and guarding, or asleep and absent. But sleep is not pure absence. It is full of transitions, adjustments, and thresholds. The body rolls, startles, warms itself, responds to pressure, sometimes rises quickly into alertness. These are not modern inventions. They belong to human biology itself. So when we ask why most of human history slept without safety, part of the answer begins here. Humans did not evolve with a sleep system built for total disconnection from uncertainty. They evolved with a sleep system that had to function in the presence of uncertainty. That is a quieter and more powerful thought. The body did not wait for the world to become safe enough for perfect surrender. It learned to rest in a world where surrender had limits. Somewhere close to the origin of human life, that may have been one of the central facts of every night. Sleep arrived, but the body never became irrelevant to danger just because the eyes had closed. A waking human can scan distance, turn quickly, change direction, adjust posture, and decide what deserves attention. A sleeping human can do much less of that. This is not a flaw in the body. It is part of what sleep is. Rest requires a reduction in voluntary control, and that reduction is exactly what makes sleep restorative while also making it risky. The same organism that needs time away from continuous effort cannot defend itself in the same way during that time. For most of the human story, this biological fact would have mattered every night, because sleep did not take place inside the heavily controlled conditions many people now take for granted. Near the beginning of our species, human beings already had the same basic bodily dilemma. They needed deep physiological restoration, but they could not obtain it by stepping outside the natural world into total protection. They had to pass through the vulnerable state of sleep while still belonging to a changing environment. That simple reality may explain why safety in human sleep was never merely an individual achievement. The body alone cannot solve the problem. No person can remain fully aware and fully restored at once. If a sleeper is to survive in less protected conditions, some of the burden must be shifted outward, into place, timing, habit, fire, shelter, and above all, other humans nearby. This is one reason the modern ideal of sleep as a solitary private performance can be misleading when projected into deep history. The older human body was still a body that weakened its outward command of the world when sleep came, so whatever safety existed around it was likely not created by isolation but by arrangement. The body's limits made social and environmental support more important, not less. Even now, human sleep still carries signs of that older arrangement. A person often rests differently in a familiar place than in an unfamiliar one. A repeated sound may fade into the background, while an unexpected sound cuts through at once. The body can stay asleep through some forms of continuity but react quickly to disruption. These are modest observations from ordinary life, yet they help us avoid a major mistake. Ancient sleep should not be imagined as either peaceful modern sleep in a primitive setting or non-stop terror with no rest at all. More likely, it occupied a shifting middle ground shaped by what the body can and cannot do. Humans can sleep under imperfect conditions, but not without cost, adjustment, and dependence on circumstances beyond the self. That would have been especially true near the origin point of human history, when the human body had not changed into a different kind of sleeper, but the world around it remained far less buffered. The body still heard, felt, startled, rolled, woke, settled, and woke again. It still carried the same ancient problem into every night: how to let go enough to recover, but not so completely that recovery became fatal. In that sense, the body never stops guarding because it never becomes free of its own exposure. It cannot preserve full vigilance through sleep, but neither can it behave as though the outside world has ceased to matter. This is not a dramatic contradiction. It is a biological one. The body must enter a state that reduces action while remaining a body that lives among pressure, temperature, sound, movement, and other organisms. So when we say that most of human history slept without safety, we are also saying something very specific about the human organism. We are saying that the body humans inherited did not evolve under nightly conditions of complete insulation. It evolved under conditions where rest had to occur before absolute security existed, and where the sleeper remained, in every age, a creature that could never entirely stop belonging to the world outside the skin. The modern mind is often tempted to imagine that a sleeping body, once comfortable enough, simply drops out of the world. But comfort is not the same thing as disconnection. A blanket can soften cold, a wall can block wind, a familiar room can reduce surprise. Yet none of these remove the deeper biological truth that sleep changes the body's powers without cancelling the world around it. The sleeper still lies inside gravity, temperature, contact, smell, sound, and the possible arrival of disturbance. That has always been true, and it becomes more revealing when we turn back toward the beginning of human life, where the body was far less surrounded by artificial layers of protection. Near that beginning, the human organism already had to perform the same basic act it performs now. It had to pass from waking control into reduced control, and then, if all went well, return again. But the difference was that this passage happened much closer to the open conditions of the earth. The body did not sleep above the ground in specially designed frames, under tightly sealed roofs, inside rooms whose air and temperature could be controlled in advance. It slept in settings where the limits of the body were more exposed and therefore more consequential. A small change in the environment would have mattered more because fewer barriers stood between the sleeper and the world. This does not mean early humans were always on the edge of catastrophe. It means the body's ordinary vulnerability remained more visible. Today, many people experience sleep as a private event inside a managed interior. In the longer human past, sleep was likely less private, less separated, and less capable of pretending that the body had become unreachable. To understand the title of this video, that point is essential. Humans did not spend most of their history sleeping inside the fantasy of complete nighttime protection, because the material conditions that support such a fantasy are historically recent. For much of our existence, the body at night was still a body sharing space with others, resting near sounds that had not been silenced, on surfaces not fully shaped for rest, under conditions not guaranteed to remain stable until dawn. The body could sleep there because it had to, but it could not sleep there as though exposure had disappeared. That may be why even modern sleep still contains echoes of negotiation rather than absolute surrender. People settle more easily in some places than in others. They respond differently to familiar sounds than to unfamiliar ones. They may sleep through one kind of continuity and wake to one small sign of change. These are not proofs of prehistoric life in a strict sense, but they do fit the deeper logic of a body that never evolved in perfect separation from the night. Somewhere close to the origin of our species, sleep was already a remarkable compromise. The body needed to restore itself, yet it could only do so by entering a state that reduced its immediate command over the environment. Safety, then, could never have come entirely from inside the sleeper. It had to be borrowed from nearness, routine, fire, place, shelter, and the quiet cooperation of other human bodies nearby. Once this becomes clear, the human story of unsafe sleep stops sounding like an exaggerated claim and starts sounding like a long condition of life. The body was never designed for total nighttime independence. It was designed to endure the night imperfectly, in relation to others and to the world around it. That is the deeper meaning of saying the body never stops guarding. It does not mean the body remains fully awake in secret. It means sleep itself has always been shaped by the fact that human beings rest as exposed creatures first, and protected sleepers only much later in history. Night is easy to misunderstand when seen from the modern world. Electric light has trained many people to imagine darkness as simple absence, a blank interval between the useful hours of day and the private stillness of sleep. But for most of human history, night was not empty. It was full of information, though much of that information arrived in forms the eye could no longer master. When the light dropped, the world did not become inactive. It became harder to read. Sound carried differently. Distance changed its meaning. Shapes lost their certainty. The edge of the group became less visible. The limits of shelter mattered more. A place that felt manageable at dusk could feel altered after full dark, not because the landscape itself had become new, but because the body's access to it had narrowed. This matters near the beginning of human history, because early humans did not leave the natural world behind at sunset. They remained inside it, only now with reduced vision and greater dependence on other senses, memory, routine, and nearness to others. In that setting, darkness was not a quiet backdrop to sleep. It was one of the main conditions that made sleep uncertain. To say that night was not empty is not to turn the prehistoric dark into a theatre of constant drama. It is to notice that in low light, many ordinary things become harder to judge. A rustle may be nothing important, but it still asks for interpretation. A shift in wind may carry scent differently. The sounds of insects, distant animals, moving people, or changing fire can merge into a field of signals that must be lived with, even when they cannot all be understood. For a species whose history began in outdoor and partly sheltered environments, the night was therefore thick with unresolved meaning. The body did not receive a clean message that all was calm. More often, it likely received a moving mixture of continuity and uncertainty. That is one reason modern safe sleep is so historically unusual. Today, many sleepers lie in rooms designed to reduce the amount of night that reaches them. Light is controlled. Doors create boundaries. Outside sounds are softened. Ground becomes floor becomes bed, and bed becomes a protected platform. But if we move back toward the early human condition, those layers begin to fall away. Then night returns as a more immediate presence. Darkness no longer means privacy. It means limited knowledge. It means that much of the world is still there but no longer fully available to sight. For beings who began their history under those conditions, sleep could not simply be a withdrawal into nothingness. It had to take place while the world remained active beyond the edge of visibility. This may help explain why human sleep is so deeply tied to context. The body is not only responding to internal fatigue, it is also responding to how readable the environment feels. Near the origin point of our species, the environment after dark would often have been less readable, less controllable, and more dependent on shared familiarity. A known place with known companions and known rhythms was not the same as an unknown place after sundown. The dark did not erase those differences, it sharpened them. This is why the title of the video reaches beyond walls and weapons and enters perception itself. Humans slept without safety, partly because they slept in a world where darkness did not remove reality, but only removed clarity. The night was still inhabited by weather, ground, sound, temperature, other humans and other animals. It still demanded interpretation, even when the body was least equipped to provide it. Somewhere near the starting point of human life, this may have been one of the most basic truths of every evening. When the sun went down, the world did not become empty enough for easy surrender. It became harder to know, and the body had to sleep there anyway. In darkness, the human world does not disappear. It only loses its edges. That may be one of the most important differences between day and night near the beginning of our species. During the day, distance can often be judged before contact. The eye works ahead of the body. It marks the path, notices movement, separates one object from another, and gives warning before nearness becomes danger. At night, much of that advantage weakens. The world becomes harder to divide into harmless and harmful, familiar and unfamiliar, stable and changing. A place that could be read in daylight becomes a place that must be sensed more indirectly, through memory, sound, smell, touch, and the behavior of others nearby. For most of human history, this would have mattered deeply because sleep did not happen after the environment had been fully mastered. It happened inside environments whose meanings changed after dark. That shift alone could make the night less secure, even without dramatic events. A faint movement in low light can feel larger because detail is missing. A known sound can remain tolerable because it fits expectation, while a new sound becomes difficult to ignore because it arrives without context. The body does not need proof of disaster to lose ease. It only needs uncertainty. That is why darkness should not be understood as empty space. It is better understood as reduced certainty. And reduced certainty changes what sleep means. Near the origin point of human life, people were not sleeping inside bright systems of artificial separation. They were sleeping in relation to open air, changing temperature, uneven sound, variable shelter, and the close presence of other human bodies. Under those conditions, darkness would not simply have hidden danger, it would have hidden distinctions. The body may hear something without seeing its source. It may feel a shift in air before knowing what caused it. It may register that the group around it is no longer arranged in quite the same way. None of this requires panic. It only requires a world in which the limits of knowledge arrive earlier than the limits of reality. This is one reason safe modern sleep feels so different from older human sleep. Today, many people pass the night inside environments that reduce uncertainty by design. Light can be restored instantly. Familiar walls define boundaries. Windows turn outside movement into something distant. The unknown remains, but it has been pushed farther away from the sleeping body. In the longer human past, that distance was often smaller. The sleeper and the night remained more directly connected. Darkness therefore carried not just fear in the emotional sense, but a practical loss of information. The body could not know as much, as early, or as clearly, and yet the body still had to rest. This may be one of the coldest aspects of the human story. Sleep had to occur under the very condition that made interpretation weaker. Near the beginning of our species, the body did not receive a separate safe world for nighttime use. It inherited one world, seen differently by day and by night, and it had to survive in both. The night narrowed what could be known, but it did not narrow what could happen. That imbalance may have shaped human rest more deeply than we often notice. It helps explain why proximity, routine, familiarity, and the stable presence of others would have mattered so much. In darkness, these were not luxuries. They were among the few ways uncertainty could be reduced without ever being removed. So when we say that night was never empty, we are really saying something larger. We are saying that for most of human history, sleep took place not in silence or blankness, but in a world that remained present while becoming harder to read. The darkness did not create a second universe. It left humans inside the same universe with less clarity and asked the body to surrender there anyway. The modern sleeper often defeats the night before sleep even begins. A switch is pressed, a curtain is drawn, a door is closed, a familiar space is arranged into softness and order, and darkness becomes something measured and limited. It enters the room only in a controlled way. This can make it difficult to imagine what darkness was for most of human history, because the modern mind treats it as an absence that can be managed rather than a condition that reshapes perception. But near the beginning of human life, darkness was not something placed neatly around sleep. It was part of the world itself, and the body had to enter rest while still surrounded by it. That difference may sound small, yet it changes everything. When darkness cannot be cleanly separated from the sleeping place, the boundary between shelter and outside becomes thinner. Sound matters more. The arrangement of bodies matters more. The persistence of fire matters more. The memory of terrain matters more. A sleeper is not only asking whether danger is present. A sleeper is also living inside reduced access to knowledge. This is the deeper reason night could make sleep feel unsafe even when nothing dramatic occurred. The issue was not only what might be out there. The issue was how little could be confirmed once sight lost its reach. A known environment could still help. Familiarity mattered. Repeated sounds, expected smells, and the steady presence of others could all soften uncertainty. But they did not erase the condition itself. Darkness still changed the terms under which the body met the world, and for most of human history, that was not an occasional discomfort. It was the normal background of sleep. This is why the history of unsafe sleep is not only about predators, conflict, weather, or exposure in the obvious sense. It is also about the more basic fact that human beings spent most of their existence trying to rest in a world that became less legible after sunset. The body may be tired enough to sleep, but tiredness does not restore lost clarity. It only makes surrender necessary. Somewhere close to the origin of our species, that may have been one of the quiet rules of every night. The world remained there in full, while the body's ability to read it had already begun to fade. Seen this way, safety was never just the absence of attack. It was the degree to which uncertainty could be reduced before sleep took over. A little firelight, known companions, a sheltered position, and repeated habit could all narrow uncertainty, but not abolish it. The night was still larger than whatever small circle of order a human group could build within it. That thought brings the first movement of this video to its real conclusion. Humans did not spend most of their history sleeping in a world that had become quiet, empty, and fully interpretable. They slept in a world that stayed present while becoming harder to know. The dark did not cancel reality, it thickened it. It drew more of life beyond the edge of certainty, then asked the body to lie down anyway. If sleep in the modern sense often feels like release, sleep across most of human history may have felt more like a managed descent, never entirely free from the unfinished world around it. And that is why the title is not simply about fear. It is about a long human condition in which rest had to happen before the night could ever be made truly safe. For most modern people, the ground feels neutral because it has already been transformed. It lies under houses, under floors, under beds, under layers of dryness, insulation and control. It supports sleep without seeming to shape it. But for most of human history, the ground was not a hidden base beneath safety. It was part of the problem itself. To sleep on or near the ground was to remain in direct contact with a surface that carried cold, moisture, unevenness, smell, insects, and the traces of whatever else had recently occupied that place. Near the beginning of human life, this mattered because the sleeping body did not rest at a clean distance from the earth. It rested close to it, often with only limited separation. That alone changes the meaning of nighttime safety. A body sleeping near the ground is not only exposed to what approaches from farther away, it is also exposed to what rises from underneath and surrounds it at the smallest scale. Temperature can drain into the body through contact. Dampness can remain long after air feels calm. A slight slope can alter posture for hours. Small organisms need no dramatic entrance because they already belong to the surface itself. None of this requires a scene of crisis. It only requires a world in which the place of rest is not fully purified before the body lies down. This is why the ground should not be imagined as a simple natural bed. It is true that human beings spent most of their existence sleeping much closer to the earth than most people do now, but closeness is not the same as safety. The earth can support a body while also making recovery harder. Hardness affects pressure. Unevenness changes how the body settles. Cold from below behaves differently from cold moving through open air. The sleeper may conserve warmth poorly if the surface beneath remains colder than the body can easily tolerate. Near the origin point of our species, before raised sleeping platforms, thick manufactured bedding, sealed floors, or reliable indoor separation became common, these would not have been minor details. They would have shaped the quality and security of sleep itself. What matters here is not to romanticize hardship or exaggerate certainty. We cannot reconstruct every prehistoric sleeping arrangement. Some groups likely used plant matter, skins, prepared ground, sheltered spots, or other forms of local adaptation. The archaeological record even shows evidence that people sometimes arrange sleeping surfaces with care. But care is not the same thing as full protection. Even a chosen place on the ground remains part of the living landscape. It can be improved but rarely erased. That is the deeper point. For most of human history, sleep did not float above the earth in protected stability. It pressed against it. The ground remained an active condition of rest, not a silent foundation beneath it. This may be one reason modern sleep feels so materially different from older human sleep. A raised bed does more than provide softness. It creates separation. It lifts the body away from cold transfer, crawling life, pool dampness, roughness, and the immediate signals of the surface. That separation is easy to forget because it now feels ordinary. But if we move back toward the early human condition, the body loses that distance and returns to a more direct relation with the earth. Then the title of the video becomes clearer in a new way. Humans slept without safety not only because the night around them was uncertain, but because even the surface beneath them could not be assumed to be harmless. Somewhere near the beginning of our species, rest likely depended not on finding perfect ground, but on finding ground that was merely good enough for one more night. That is a colder image of human sleep, and perhaps a more accurate one. The body lay down not on a neutral surface prepared by civilization, but on a piece of earth that could only ever be partly negotiated, never fully tamed. The ground does not behave the same way toward a sleeping body as it does toward a walking one. By day, a rough surface can simply be crossed. A damp patch can be avoided. A small slope can be adjusted to in motion, but at night, when the body is meant to remain still for long stretches, those same qualities change their meaning. What is tolerable for a few minutes upright can become draining over hours when lying down. This is one reason the Earth itself mattered so much in the long history of human sleep. Near the beginning of our species, rest did not occur above the landscape in carefully designed suspension. It occurred within the landscape, where the body had to negotiate whatever the surface allowed. Hardness, pressure, cold, dampness, and instability were not background details. They were part of the conditions under which sleep either held or broke apart. Even now, a person can feel how strongly a surface affects rest. A bed that is too hard, too soft, too cold, too uneven, or too unfamiliar can alter how the body settles, how often posture changes, and how easily sleep deepens. That simple truth becomes more revealing when we remove the protective technologies of modern sleep and imagine the older human condition more carefully. A body close to the ground is not only closer to the earth in a poetic sense, it is more directly exposed to the earth as a physical system. Heat can move away, moisture can remain trapped near contact points, pressure can accumulate in places that would otherwise be relieved by softer or better shaped support. Over the course of a night, that means the body is not merely resting in nature, it is constantly being shaped by it. For most of human history, this would have mattered because the human species began without stable floors, padded bedding, elevated frames, or reliable control over the surface of sleep. There may have been careful site choice, prepared areas, gathered plant matter, skins, or local sleeping arrangements that improved comfort and reduced exposure. Archaeology and ethnographic evidence both suggest that humans often modified their sleeping places where possible. But again, modification is not immunity. A chosen patch of ground can still remain cold from below, wet in ways the eye missed, uneven in ways the body only discovers later, or alive with the small forms of life that share the same terrain. This is where the title becomes more material and less abstract. Unsafe sleep was not only about what might arrive from the darkness beyond the sleeper, it was also about what the sleeper could not escape beneath the body itself. A human lying on the ground remains in contact with a world that does not stop acting simply because sleep has begun. The surface still conducts temperature, it still holds traces of weather, it still belongs to insects, roots, dust, and texture. Somewhere near the origin of human life, this may have been one of the most ordinary forms of vulnerability, so constant that it needed no drama. The body lay down and accepted a place that would support it imperfectly. That imperfection may have helped shape the very rhythm of ancient nights. The sleeper shifts, curls, turns, pulls closer to warmth, seeks a drier patch, presses against another body, or uses what little material is available to create a margin between flesh and earth. These small acts do not prove a single prehistoric pattern, but they fit a larger human logic. Sleep on the ground was rarely the same as peace with the ground. It was an accommodation, and for most of human history, accommodation may have been the closest thing available to safety. The earth beneath the sleeper was never just a passive platform. It remained an active presence, continuously reminding the body that rest had to happen not above the world, but still inside it. What modern sleep often hides is not just the history of danger, but the history of contact. A raised bed, a floor, a dry room, and layers of manufactured material allow the body to forget how much the surface beneath it matters. The sleeper is lifted away from the earth and begins to experience rest as something almost detached from place. But for most of human history, that detachment did not exist. Humans slept much closer to the ground, and that meant they slept much closer to a world that could not be fully softened, cleaned, dried, or stabilized. The ground was not simply where sleep happened, it was one of the reasons sleep remained uncertain. Near the beginning of our species, the body did not settle into rest inside a carefully engineered zone made to preserve warmth, reduce pressure, and separate flesh from moisture and crawling life. It settled into whatever degree of separation a group could temporarily create. That might include chosen terrain, gathered plant matter, skins, ash, repeated sleeping places, or local shelter. Human beings were not passive in the face of the environment. They likely worked constantly to improve their chances, including at night. But the important distinction remains. Improvement is not the same as control. However carefully a sleeping place was prepared, the body still remained close to the earth, and the earth remained active. Cold could rise through the surface. Dampness could stay hidden until long contact revealed it. Irregular pressure could slowly change how the body rested. Tiny organisms needed no breach because the sleeping place was already part of their habitat too. This older condition helps explain why sleeping safely was never just about being tired enough to fall asleep. It was also about whether the body could maintain enough warmth, dryness, and relative stillness to stay asleep in the first place. That is a very different picture from the modern idea that sleep naturally unfolds once the mind relaxes. For most of the human story, the success of sleep likely depended as much on managing the material ground as on any inward sense of ease. Near the origin point of human life, the body may have learned night after night that rest was possible only through imperfect negotiation with the surface below. A place could be better than another place. It could be more sheltered, more familiar, less damp, less exposed, more suitable for lying close together, but it was rarely transformed into a neutral sleeping technology. It remained Earth first, sleeping place second. Once that becomes clear, the title of this video gains another layer. Humans slept without safety not only because darkness limited knowledge, and because the body itself became vulnerable, but because even the contact point between body and world remained unstable. The sleeper could not simply withdraw from the landscape. The landscape stayed in immediate touch. This may be one reason so many later developments in human life matter more than they first appear. The making of indoor floors, raised sleeping spaces, thicker bedding, enclosed rooms, and drier interiors was not merely a story of comfort. It was a long process of reducing contact with an earth that had always shaped sleep from below. Modern people often inherit the result without noticing the achievement. They think of a bed as softness. Historically, it is also distance. It is a way of refusing direct negotiation with the ground. That refusal is very recent when measured against the full span of human existence. For most of that span, people rested in contact with a surface that could support them and trouble them at the same time. The body closed its eyes not on a neutral foundation, but on a piece of the world that never stopped acting on it. Somewhere near the beginning of human history, that may have been one of the quietest and most constant truths of the night. Sleep did not begin above the earth, but pressed close against it, where safety was always partial and rest was always earned. For most modern sleepers, other people are often treated as a disturbance to rest. A body beside us can shift the mattress, change the temperature, breathe too loudly, wake too early, or take up too much space. Privacy now feels so normal that sleep is often imagined as most complete when it is solitary. But this modern expectation becomes harder to project backward the closer we move toward the beginning of human life. For most of human history, other humans were not simply optional company at night. They were likely part of the condition that made sleep possible at all. This is not because human beings always preferred closeness in some emotional sense, and it is not because every ancient group slept in the same arrangement. It is because the human body, already vulnerable in sleep, could borrow a form of protection from nearness that it could not generate alone. A sleeping person cannot watch in every direction, maintain warmth as efficiently in isolation, or manage every interruption without cost. But a group changes the problem. Many bodies in one place alter temperature, sound, rhythm, and awareness. They create continuity. They reduce the chances that one sleeper is facing the entire night alone. Near the origin of our species, that may have mattered more than most modern people realize. Human beings did not begin their history as isolated nighttime units, each retiring into a separate protected chamber. They began in groups whose survival depended heavily on coordination, shared space, and repeated proximity. That logic likely did not end at sunset. If anything, night may have intensified it. In darkness, when vision narrows and the body yields some control, the presence of familiar others becomes more than social background. It becomes part of the sleeping environment itself. A known body nearby can mean shared warmth, shared sound, shared reaction, shared continuity through the night. Even silence changes when it is shared. The sleeper no longer rests against emptiness, but against the steady signs of others still being there. This should not be romanticized. Sleeping near others can also mean more movement, more noise, more interruption, and less personal space. But in the older human world, the question was not whether shared sleep was perfectly comfortable. The question was whether it made unsafe sleep more survivable. In many conditions, it likely did. The group could not remove darkness, hard ground, or uncertainty, yet it could reduce exposure by turning one vulnerable body into part of a cluster of bodies, one set of senses into many, one fragile point into a thicker human presence. This is one reason the title of the video may point not only toward danger, but toward dependence. Humans slept without safety, partly because safety was often not an individual possession. It was distributed across the group. Near the beginning of human history, sleep may have relied less on personal control and more on collective arrangement. Where people lay, how close they stayed, who remained near children, who occupied the edge of a sleeping area, how fire was maintained, how familiarity reduced surprise. All of these may have mattered more than any single sleeper's preferences. Modern sleep often gives the impression that the ideal night is the most private one. The longer human story suggests something else. It suggests that rest emerged within shared human space long before it became a solitary private experience. Somewhere near the starting point of our species, the body may have learned one of its deepest nighttime lessons from this condition. To sleep was not to withdraw completely from other humans. It was to depend on them differently. In a world where the night could not be fully controlled, the nearness of others may have been one of the few forms of safety that the body could actually feel before morning arrived. A lone sleeper must solve the night with only one body. That body must hold its own warmth, absorb every unfamiliar sound alone, and move between rest and alertness without help. A group changes that equation even before any deliberate action is taken. Bodies gathered in one place change temperature, reduce the psychological force of open space, create familiar sound, and make interruption less isolating. For most of human history, this may have been one of the most basic ways human beings reduce the danger of sleep without ever eliminating it. Near the beginning of our species, safety at night was unlikely to be something stored in walls or locks. It was more likely to be built from nearness, repeated arrangement, memory of place, and the stabilizing effect of familiar others. This does not mean every sleeping group was calm or perfectly ordered. Shared sleep brings its own problems. Someone shifts position. A child cries. A sick person coughs. One person rises. Another returns. Space becomes crowded. Rest becomes uneven. But those disturbances should not be confused with failure. In a less protected world, some interruption may have been the price of not being alone. The modern sleeper often imagines uninterrupted privacy as the natural ideal because modern architecture makes that ideal possible. Yet, if we move back toward the longer human baseline, sleep may have depended less on uninterrupted stillness and more on surviving the night within a shared human field. That shared field mattered because one sleeper's vulnerability could be partly buffered by the presence of others. Sound itself changes in this setting. A completely solitary night leaves every unexpected noise standing out against emptiness. A shared sleeping place produces continuity. Breathing, shifting, low movement, the quiet evidence that the group remains present. Familiar continuity can make uncertainty easier to carry, not because the world outside disappears, but because the sleeper is not facing it as a singular exposed point. This is one reason ancient sleep was likely more social in a practical sense than modern people first assume. The body's ability to rest was tied not only to fatigue or darkness, but to whether the surrounding human arrangement made surrender less costly. Near the origin point of human life, children would not have been an exception to this pattern. They would have made it even more necessary. The needs of infants, the vulnerability of the young, and the dependence of mothers on proximity would all have pulled sleep towards shared space rather than away from it. Older individuals, injured bodies, or those weakened by illness would have done the same. In this sense, human sleep was shaped not by one abstract adult sleeper, but by mixed groups with unequal bodies and unequal needs. That makes the title of the video more specific. Humans slept without safety, partly because safety at night had to be created socially and imperfectly, again and again, under conditions that never allowed full control. The group could reduce risk, but it could not transform night into a modern protected interior. It could only make sleep more possible. Somewhere near the beginning of human history, that may have been enough. The body did not need perfect certainty to close its eyes. It needed a margin, however thin. Shared sleep may have been one of the oldest ways humans built that margin, not by removing darkness, not by ending exposure, but by making one vulnerable sleeper part of a larger living presence that carried the night together. In that older world, the closeness of others was not simply companionship. It was one of the structures from which sleep itself borrowed its fragile stability. What modern sleep often treats as inconvenience, older human life may have treated as protection. Another body nearby could interrupt rest, but it could also make rest possible. This is the point where the history of unsafe sleep becomes inseparable from the history of human social life. For most of our existence, people likely did not sleep as isolated individuals who happened to belong to a group by day. They slept as members of a group whose nighttime arrangement mattered because the body alone could not manufacture safety while asleep. Near the beginning of our species, rest was not just a private biological event. It was a collective condition shaped by proximity, familiarity, and the uneven needs of different human bodies. This does not mean ancient people consciously understood sleep in those terms. We do not need to assign modern theories to them. It is enough to see that the practical reality of sleep would have pushed human beings toward one another. Infants required constant closeness. Children could not be left to the night alone. Older bodies and weakened bodies likely needed nearness for warmth, assistance, and immediate response. Adults in full strength still slept more vulnerably than they lived by day. Under those conditions, sleeping near others was not merely custom, it was one of the few available ways to make the night less costly. The group did not create perfect peace. It created a thicker margin against uncertainty. That margin may have been built from many small things. Warmth held longer in shared space. Familiar breathing and movement could reduce the force of silence. An unexpected sound no longer met one isolated sleeper but reached many bodies at once. A person waking briefly was still waking within human presence, not into emptiness. None of these conditions removed the unfinished world outside. Darkness remained. Weather remained. The ground remained imperfect. Animals, insects, strangers, and chance all remained possible. But the group altered how that world was encountered. It meant the sleeper did not pass through the night as a single exposed point. The body borrowed some of its safety from the continued existence of other bodies close by. This may be one of the oldest truths hidden inside human sleep. Even now, many people feel the difference between a familiar shared space and an unfamiliar solitary one, though modern life often teaches them to value the second more highly. Historically, however, the first may have been closer to the human baseline. Sleep was not born in privacy. It was born in dependence, repetition, and shared vulnerability. Somewhere near the origin of human history, the body may have learned that rest was not secured by controlling the whole environment, because the whole environment could not be controlled. It was secured by reducing exposure through arrangement, and human arrangement was among the strongest tools available. Once we see this, the title of the video takes on a fuller meaning. Humans slept without safety not because they had no strategies, but because their strategies could only create partial protection. The nearness of others was one of those strategies, and perhaps one of the most important. It did not turn night into modern safety. It turned night into something survivable enough that sleep could continue. That is a quieter, more human image than the usual extremes of comfort or terror. It suggests that across most of human history, rest was not an escape from dependence. It was one of the deepest forms of dependence the species ever knew. The sleeper lay down not protected from other humans, but protected partly by them, within a fragile circle of shared presence that held just long enough for another night to pass. Fire changed the human night so deeply that it is tempting to treat it as the moment sleep finally became safe. A circle of light pushes back darkness, makes familiar faces visible, offers warmth, and may discourage some animals from coming too near. In the long human story, these are not small advantages. They may have altered the night more than almost any other tool early humans possessed. Yet it would be a mistake to imagine that once fire entered human life, the problem of unsafe sleep was solved. Fire did not remove the night. It only changed one part of the body's relationship to it. Near the beginning of our species, if fire was present and maintained, It could create a temporary center of order in a world that otherwise remained open, cold, and difficult to read after dark. But a center is not the same as a sealed refuge. The light of a fire reaches only so far. Beyond that circle, the dark remains. Its uncertainty remains. Its sounds remain. Even within the lighted space, safety is still conditional. Fire needs fuel. It needs tending. It changes in strength. It throws shifting shadows that can make movement more visible and less readable at the same time. Smoke may help in some contexts and trouble the body in others. Warmth can ease one form of discomfort while never becoming a total barrier against everything the night still contains. This is the key point. Fire improved the human night, but it did not finish it. It gave early humans a powerful way to reduce some kinds of exposure, especially cold and immediate darkness nearby. Yet it could not turn the sleeping place into a modern interior. The ground beneath the body still mattered. The limits of shelter still mattered. Other living things still existed beyond the light. The body still became vulnerable when sleep took over. Near the origin point of human history, fire may therefore be understood not as the invention of nighttime safety, but as the invention of a margin. It made sleep more possible, more stable, more extended perhaps, but still within a world where complete control remained out of reach. This distinction matters because modern people often inherit fire in its most domesticated form. It comes through walls, stoves, switches, hidden systems, and regulated heat. It feels reliable, contained, and obedient. Early fire was nothing like that. It was immediate, visible, consuming, unstable, and dependent on human attention. It could go low, it could go out, it could move with wind, it could demand labor before sleep and even during the night. So the old relationship between fire and sleep was not simply one of comfort, it was one of management. Humans did not receive a permanently defended night. They built and rebuilt a local advantage against it. Somewhere near the beginning of human life, that local advantage may have changed the rhythm of evening itself. A group near a fire could gather, warm itself, maintain visibility within a small zone, and perhaps reduce some of the uncertainty that darkness imposed. But even then, sleep remained sleep. The body still had to surrender in stages. Someone might still need to wake. Someone might still notice that the warmth had thinned, that the sound outside the circle had changed, that the arrangement of bodies and shadows was no longer the same. Fire did not erase these conditions. It became part of the arrangement through which human beings lived with them. This is why the title of the video remains true even after fire enters the story. Humans slept without safety not because they lacked all means of protection, but because their protections were partial, perishable, and constantly dependent on maintenance. Fire was among the greatest of those protections. It may have been one of the oldest ways humans shaped the night to fit the body's need for rest, but it did not turn the night into peace. It only made the long human compromise of sleep a little more possible. A fire changes more than temperature. It changes distance, attention, and the shape of human space. A sleeping place without fire belongs almost completely to the larger night. A sleeping place with fire creates a center, however small, where warmth gathers, faces remain visible a little longer, and the dark no longer begins at the edge of the body itself. For most of human history, this would have mattered enormously. Near the beginning of our species, any reliable use of fire at night would have given human groups one of the few ways to alter the darkness rather than simply endure it. The body could settle closer to warmth. Familiar others could remain visible. The immediate ground could be chosen and arranged around a source of light. Some animals may have kept more distance. Some uncertainties may have become easier to bear. Yet all of these changes should be understood carefully. Fire reduced certain problems, but it also revealed how many problems still remained. Its protection was local, not total. Light from flame does not erase the night. It only creates a boundary between what can still be seen and what cannot. In that sense, fire does not end uncertainty. It sharpens its edge. The group can now see itself and a small area around it more clearly, but beyond that circle the unknown begins again. The body may feel safer because the nearest darkness has moved outward, yet it has not disappeared. This is one reason fire should not be mistaken for a final solution. It is better understood as a fragile expansion of order into a world that remains larger than the order itself. Near the origin point of human life, that fragile expansion may have shaped sleep in subtle ways. A body resting near fire could borrow warmth that would otherwise be lost to cold air and cold ground. Familiar sounds around the fire might make the night more continuous and less abrupt. The group might remain more tightly arranged around a center, reducing the sense of exposure that open darkness creates. But fire also demanded human effort. Wood had to be found, carried, fed, and watched. Smoke could drift, sting, or thicken the air. Heat could fluctuate. A fire that burns low no longer gives the same light or comfort. A fire that is neglected can vanish into ash before morning. So the human relationship between fire and sleep was never simply passive. People did not just enjoy the fire and drift into perfectly protected rest. They depended on something alive, consuming, and unstable. Something that improved the night only so long as it could be maintained. This matters because it keeps the title of the video honest. Humans slept without safety even after fire became part of their lives. Not because fire was weak, but because the world it acted on was still only partly transformed. The ground remained hard or damp beneath prepared sleeping places. The limits of shelter remained. Weather still mattered. The body still surrendered control during sleep. Other living creatures still occupied the landscape beyond the light. Fire may have made all of this more manageable, but it did not remove the deeper structure of exposure. Somewhere near the beginning of human history, sleep beside fire may have felt less like victory over the night, and more like a negotiated pause within it. The flame held a small area together. It bought time. It widened the human margin against darkness. But it did not abolish the old human condition of resting before the world had become fully safe. If anything, fire makes that condition easier to see. It shows how much labor and intelligence were required just to create a temporary island of warmth and visibility, and how narrow that island still remained against the much larger night around it. The history of fire is not the history of safety completed. It is the history of safety attempted. That difference matters because modern people often inherit the end result of controlled heat and light without feeling the uncertainty that once surrounded them. A lamp turns on. A room warms. The night recedes behind glass and walls. Fire now seems obedient, almost invisible in its modern forms. But near the beginning of human life, fire was never merely a convenience added to sleep. It was one of the few ways humans could push back against cold and darkness at all. And precisely for that reason it reveals how incomplete their protection still was. If fire had truly solved the problem, the title of this video would begin to collapse here. Yet it does not collapse. It survives. Because fire did not create a sealed, sleeping world. It created a temporary advantage inside an unsealed one. That temporary advantage was immense. It may have changed evening gathering, warmth, visibility, the arrangement of bodies, the perception of nearby space, and the general possibility of remaining in one place through the night. It likely helped make certain forms of rest more stable than they otherwise would have been. But none of this turned sleep into a guaranteed state. Fire could fail, fuel could run low, wind could change its behavior, smoke could trouble the lungs and eyes, a flame could shrink into embers while the night remained long. Even when it burned well, it only transformed a limited circle. Outside that circle, the dark still held its full uncertainty. Inside it, the body still lay down on imperfect ground, still depended on others, still passed into reduced control. Fire improved the terms of sleep, but it did not change the nature of sleep itself. The sleeper remained vulnerable. This may be the most important lesson fire adds to the human story. It shows that early humans were not passive victims of the night nor masters of it. They were active negotiators with it. They worked to shape the conditions of sleep, but the conditions they built were never final. Somewhere near the origin point of our species, the fire may have marked the difference between greater exposure and lesser exposure, not between danger and perfect peace. That is a quieter image, and likely a truer one. A body near the flames could rest more fully perhaps, or at least more warmly, more socially, more visibly. Yet it still rested in a world that remained only partly transformed. The old human compromise continued. Sleep still came before complete safety had arrived. In this way, fire does not end the argument of the title. it deepens it. Humans slept without safety not because they lacked intelligence, cooperation, or tools, but because even their best tools could only carve out small and temporary pockets of protection within a much larger uncertainty. Fire was among the greatest of those tools. It may have given the human night a center for the first time, but a center is not the same as a fortress. It is a place from which vulnerability can be reduced, not erased. And perhaps that is why fire belongs so centrally in the long history of human sleep. It stands as one of the clearest signs that the species was always trying to make the night livable, even while knowing, in the logic of the body if not in words, that the night could never be fully brought under human control. The flame held, the group gathered, the ground was made a little more tolerable, and the body finally closed its eyes. Not because the world had become safe, but because for one more night it had become safe enough. A shelter changes the night, but it does not automatically defeat it. This is easy to forget in the modern world, where shelter often means thick walls, stable roofs, sealed openings, controlled air, and a deep separation between body and landscape. For most of human history, shelter was usually a lesser thing. It could reduce exposure, but it rarely erased it. Near the beginning of human life, a protected sleeping place might mean a cave, a rock overhang, a windbreak, a temporary structure, a screened area, or a carefully chosen location that offered some advantage against cold, rain, visibility, or open approach. These were meaningful improvements. They could change whether the body held warmth, whether a fire remained useful, whether the group stayed together more easily, and whether the night pressed in from every direction at once. But shelter in this older sense should not be confused with full indoor safety. It was often partial, local, and dependent on conditions that could change. A roof may block rain without blocking cold air. A wall may reduce wind without sealing sound. A cave may provide cover while still remaining damp, uneven, smoky, or shared with other forms of life. This is the central point. Shelter lowered certain kinds of exposure, but it did not remove the deeper vulnerability of sleep. The body still had to lie down. The ground still mattered. Darkness still began outside the limited protected zone. The group still depended on one another. Fire, if present, still needed care. For most of human history, shelter was not the end of the problem. It was one of the ways humans made the problem smaller. Near the origin point of our species, that distinction likely shaped the entire experience of nighttime rest. The body did not pass from wilderness into total enclosure. It passed into degrees of reduced exposure. Some places were better than others. Some were drier, warmer, more defensible, or more familiar. Some held heat better, or turned the wind away. Some allowed bodies to cluster closer, to keep infants nearer, to place fire where it could matter more. But even a good shelter was still part of the world around it, not fully removed from it. Sound could enter. Smell could enter. Cold could enter. Moisture could remain trapped. Crawling life could remain present. Human beings could choose a better night, but rarely a perfect one. This is why the history of shelter is so important to the title of the video. Humans slept without safety not because they lacked intelligence or adaptation, but because adaptation itself often worked by reducing exposure rather than abolishing it. Shelter belongs to that long human effort. It represents selection, memory, labor, and local knowledge. It shows that people were always trying to improve the conditions of sleep, yet it also shows how difficult full safety really was. If the sleeping place still depends on the shape of stone, the direction of wind, the dryness of ground, the management of smoke, the closeness of others, and the behavior of the night outside, then the body remains inside a vulnerable system even while sheltered. Somewhere near the beginning of human history, this may have been the ordinary reality of rest. Sleep did not happen out in the open every night, and it did not happen in secure indoor certainty either. It happened in between. It happened where humans could gather enough cover to soften the night without ever mastering it completely. That older meaning of shelter is colder than the modern one. It does not promise peace. It promises only a narrower exposure, a smaller opening through which the night can still reach the sleeper. And for most of human history, that may have been all the body could ask for before finally giving in to sleep. A place to sleep becomes a shelter only when it changes what the night can do to the body. That change may be large or small, A roof can break rain. A wall can weaken wind. A narrow entrance can make approach more predictable. A familiar enclosure can gather warmth, hold smoke differently, and keep the group closer together. For most of human history, these were not minor improvements. Near the beginning of our species, they may have marked the difference between a night that could be endured and a night that could not. Yet the importance of shelter should not tempt us into imagining too much. Early shelters, whether natural or built, did not function like modern interiors. They were not sealed systems that removed weather, noise, dampness, and uncertainty from sleep. More often, they changed the balance. They narrowed exposure without ending it. This is why shelter matters so much in the story of unsafe sleep. It shows how human beings tried to bend the environment in their favor, while also showing how incomplete that bending remained. A cave, for example, can offer cover and stability, but it can also hold cold air, moisture, uneven ground, smoke, and other living things. A temporary structure may reduce wind and define a shared space, yet still leave the body close to outdoor temperature shifts, insect life, and every sound beyond its thin boundary. Even a very good sleeping place in the older human sense remained tied to the wider landscape. It did not cut sleep free from the world. It only changed how directly the world touched the sleeper. This is the key distinction. Near the origin point of human life, people likely did not move each night between total exposure and total protection. They moved between worse conditions and better ones. A sheltered place might hold warmth more effectively when bodies slept close together. It might make fire more useful by protecting flame from wind. It might make the night easier to read by giving the group a stable center and more predictable edges. These are real gains. But every gain still depended on materials, weather, terrain, and the continuing effort of human bodies to arrange themselves within the space. Shelter was not safety stored in advance. It was safety partly assembled, partly borrowed, and often fragile. That fragility would have mattered, especially because sleep itself reduced the body's control. A waking person can respond quickly to a shift in wind or a change in smoke. A sleeping person cannot respond in the same way. So even good shelter did not remove the need for group awareness, routine, and the constant human work of making an imperfect place good enough. This is one reason modern sleep can be misleading when used as a model for the past. Today, a room often functions as if protection has already been completed before the sleeper arrives. Historically, that completion was rare. The shelter around early human sleep was often part of the ongoing negotiation, not the end of it. Somewhere near the beginning of human history, the body may have known this in the most practical way possible. The difference between open ground and a protected place was real, but the protected place was still not a promise. It was still stone, plant material, hide, earth, wood, smoke, wind direction, body heat, and chance arranged into a temporary margin against the night. That margin could be meaningful without ever becoming absolute. So when we say humans slept without safety, shelter does not contradict the claim, it explains it. Shelter was one of the clearest human attempts to reduce vulnerability, and the fact that such attempts remain partial is exactly what makes the long history of sleep so revealing. Humans were always building lesser versions of safety long before they could build the stronger kind many people now take for granted. Shelter did not end the long human problem of sleep, it gave that problem shape. This may be the clearest way to understand its place in the story. Modern people often think of shelter as the line between exposure and safety, as though once the body passes under a roof or behind a wall, the essential work has already been done. But across most of human history, shelter was rarely that final. It could reduce rain, redirect wind, gather warmth, and give the night more stable boundaries, yet it usually remained porous to cold, sound, dampness, smoke, insects, and the wider uncertainties of the landscape. Near the beginning of our species, a place of rest was valuable not because it removed vulnerability, but because it made vulnerability narrower, more manageable, and more shared. That is a much older meaning of shelter than the one many people inherit now. A sleeping place did not need to be perfect to matter. It only needed to improve the terms of the night enough for the body to risk closing its eyes there. This is why shelter belongs so centrally in the history of unsafe sleep. It shows the human species doing what it would do again and again across time, taking a difficult environment and trying to reduce, redirect, or soften its pressures without ever fully escaping them. A cave, an overhang, a windbreak, a structure of wood or hide, a carefully chosen depression in the terrain, all of these could matter. They could make fire more effective, hold bodies together more tightly, protect the young, reduce direct exposure, and create a sense of orientation in darkness. But even then, the shelter remained part of a living world. The night still pressed against it. Weather still altered it. The ground inside it still affected the body. The boundary between human space and non-human space was still thin by modern standards. Somewhere near the origin point of human history, the body may have learned this distinction long before it could ever be spoken. Being sheltered was not the same as being safe. It was better than openness, but still unfinished. That unfinished quality may have shaped sleep itself. The body could relax more in one place than another, but not infinitely. The group could settle more deeply in a familiar shelter than on exposed ground, but still remain dependent on arrangement, maintenance, and luck. The place of rest could become good enough, then cease to be good enough when rain changed, smoke thickened, wind shifted, or the needs of the group changed. This keeps the title of the video honest all the way through. Humans slept without safety not because they failed to seek protection, but because protection for most of human history came in degrees rather than absolutes. Shelter was one of those degrees. It was one of the most important human inventions in the broadest sense, even before formal buildings, because it allowed sleep to happen within reduced exposure. Yet, reduced exposure is not the same thing as secure sleep in the modern sense. The body still rested in a world that had not been fully tamed. Modern rooms often hide this truth because they embody the long accumulation of solved problems. Early human shelters reveal it because they stand much closer to the original condition. They show how much effort it took to create even a modest margin against the night, and how easily that margin could remain incomplete. In that way, shelter does not close the question asked by the title. It deepens it. It reminds us that for most of our existence, humans were not choosing between danger and perfect refuge. They were choosing between greater exposure and lesser exposure, and then sleeping inside the smaller of those two uncertainties. That may be one of the most human images of all, a body lying down not because safety had finally been secured, but because enough shelter had been gathered for one more night to make rest possible before the world was ever truly at peace. For most modern people, the animal world is pushed to the edges of sleep. Walls, floors, screens, sealed food, controlled waste, and managed interiors create the impression that nighttime rest belongs almost entirely to humans. Other creatures are treated as distant, occasional, or unwelcome intrusions. But for most of human history, that separation was far thinner. Humans did not sleep outside the animal world. They slept inside it. Near the beginning of our species, the night did not belong only to human bodies trying to recover. It also belonged to the many other forms of life that moved, fed, searched, nested, hunted, bit, crawled, watched, and reacted after dark. This does not mean every ancient night was dominated by large threats. It means only that the sleeping human body remained part of a living ecological field that did not pause when humans became tired. That fact alone changes the meaning of safety. A sleeping place could be chosen with care, improved by fire, narrowed by shelter, and made more stable through the closeness of other humans. Yet it still existed within a wider world populated by animals with their own routines, senses, and needs. Some creatures posed obvious danger in certain contexts. Many more posed quieter burdens. Insects that bit, parasites that spread through contact and closeness, scavengers drawn by smell, rodents drawn by stored material or shelter, and other animals whose movements, sounds, or proximity could disturb sleep even when they did not attack. Near the origin point of human life, this would have mattered because human beings did not yet sleep inside strongly separated built environments. Their sleeping places remained porous to the wider ecology around them. The body at rest was not only negotiating darkness, cold, ground, and uncertainty. It was also resting within a world where many other organisms were still active according to their own patterns. This is one reason the title of the video should not be understood too narrowly. Unsafe sleep was not only about rare moments of dramatic danger, it was also about repeated contact with a living world that could reach the sleeper in small and constant ways. A bite, a sound, a scent, a movement at the edge of firelight, the need to protect food, infants, or sleeping space from intrusion. All of these belong to a broader condition in which humans could not fully separate their nights from the nights of other animals. Even today, sleep can be altered by surprisingly small forms of animal presence. A mosquito can be enough. A scratching sound in the dark can be enough. The body does not require a great predator to lose ease. It only requires the sense that the sleeping place is shared by life beyond the self. If that remains true now, inside heavily protected environments, then it becomes easier to imagine how much more immediate the animal world may have felt near the beginning of human history. This does not require exaggeration or fantasy. It is enough to see that humans were never sleeping alone in an empty landscape. They were sleeping in habitats already occupied. The group could carve out a margin against that reality, but not erase it. Fire might push some distance outward. Shelter might narrow entry. Habits of place and arrangement might reduce disturbance. Yet the wider animal world still surrounded the human one, especially at night, when many species became more active while human vision became less reliable. Somewhere near the start of our story as a species, this may have been one of the quietest truths of sleep. To lie down was not to exit the ecology of the night. It was to remain within it, softer, slower, and less able to respond. That is why the history of human sleep cannot be told as if only humans were present. For most of our existence, sleep took place in a world shared with other living creatures, and that shared world is part of what made safety so partial, so fragile, and so hard to complete. The danger of sleeping among other animals is easy to overstate if we imagine only the largest and rarest threats. But the history of unsafe human sleep becomes clearer when we think on many scales at once. A sleeping body can be troubled not only by what could kill it quickly, but by what can disturb it, bite it, infest it, steal from it, or force it to remain more alert than full rest would allow. For most of human history, this wider animal presence would have mattered constantly, because humans did not sleep inside environments that fully excluded it. Near the beginning of our species, the sleeping place may have been warmed by fire, narrowed by shelter, and stabilized by group arrangement, yet it still remained open in important ways to the non-human world around it. That openness changes the meaning of night. The body is no longer resting in a human-only interior. It is lying down within a shared biological space, where many forms of life continue their own routines after dark. Some animals may have been dangerous under certain conditions. Others may have been merely irritating, yet irritation is not a small matter in the story of sleep. Repeated biting insects, crawling intrusions, parasites passed through close quarters, scavengers drawn by scent, and the sounds of other creatures moving nearby all make rest more fragile, even when they do not create immediate catastrophe. A sleeper does not need proof of deadly danger to lose depth, continuity, or ease. The body can be drawn upward toward alertness by smaller pressures that accumulate through the night. This is one reason the title of the video should be understood as a long condition rather than a sequence of dramatic events. Humans slept without safety, partly because the sleeping place remained ecologically porous. The line between human rest and the rest of animal life was real but thin. Fire could push some creatures back, and shelter could narrow access, but neither could completely remove the wider living world from the night. Near the origin point of human life, this would have mattered even more because the body itself was closer to the ground, closer to stored smells, closer to waste, closer to food remnants, closer to skins, plant matter, ash, and other materials that make a sleeping place legible not only to humans, but to other animals as well. What humans experienced as a place of rest could also appear to other creatures as warmth, scent, cover, or opportunity. This is not speculation beyond reason. It follows from the simple fact that sleeping humans occupied habitats already inhabited by other species, each with their own sensory world. The human group could organize itself against that fact, but not erase it. Even now, a small non-human presence can still shape sleep with surprising force. The sound of wings, the sense of movement, the awareness that something else is in the room, all of this can alter how the body rests. In deeper history, those sensations were less likely to be rare interruptions and more likely to be part of the ordinary background against which sleep had to occur. That is what makes the old human night feel so different from the modern one. It was not just darker, it was more biologically crowded. The sleeping body remained part of an ecosystem that did not accept human boundaries as fully as modern architecture now does. Somewhere near the beginning of our species, that may have been one of the quieter reasons sleep required so much arrangement, nearness, habit, and adaptation. Humans were not merely trying to rest in darkness. They were trying to rest in a world where other forms of life remained active, interested, and often unavoidable. The night did not belong to humans alone, and any history of sleep that forgets that shared ownership misses one of the deepest reasons safety remained incomplete for so long. The animal world did not merely surround human sleep, it entered into its conditions. This may be the clearest way to understand why most of human history could never treat the night as fully secure. Modern life often teaches people to think of animals as either distant nature or rare household disturbances, as though human sleep normally unfolds in a protected zone from which most other life has already been excluded. But across the greater span of human existence, that exclusion was weak, partial, and often impossible. Humans did not first build a sealed human night and then begin to rest inside it. They rested while still living among other creatures whose needs, movements, and senses continued after sunset. Near the beginning of our species, that reality would not have appeared as one dramatic problem with one dramatic solution. It would have appeared as a constant condition. Some animals mattered because they could injure or kill under particular circumstances. Many more mattered because they made sleep thinner, more interrupted, more uneasy, and more dependent on human arrangement. Small life forms could bite, irritate, infest, or spread through the very closeness that helped humans sleep together. Larger animals could be drawn by scent, warmth, shelter, food remains, or the broader habits of a human group. Other creatures may simply have remained audible in the darkness, enough to keep the boundary between human rest and the living world from ever feeling complete. This is the deeper point. Unsafe sleep was not only the possibility of attack, it was the impossibility of full separation. The sleeping place belonged to humans, but never to humans alone. Fire might push some forms of life farther away, shelter might narrow access. Chosen sleeping areas, repeated habits, smoke, ash, and group presence might reduce intrusion. Yet these were all ways of thinning contact, not abolishing it. The wider ecology still pressed close. Near the origin point of human life, the body at rest remained low to the ground, near organic materials, near the traces of food, warmth, waste, skins, plant matter, ash, and human smell. To other animals, these were not abstract signs. They were signals. They meant opportunity, disturbance, curiosity, or approach. So the human sleeping place was never simply a human idea. It was also an ecological event, legible to other living things in ways modern sleepers rarely have to consider. This may be why the long history of sleep depended so much on margins rather than certainties. A group could reduce exposure, but not end it. It could create enough order to make the night survivable, but not enough to make the body forget that the world remained populated beyond the circle of familiar humans. Even now, a tiny intruder can be enough to change the quality of sleep. That fact may seem minor until measured against the beginning of human history, when the boundary between human space and animal space was thinner almost every night. Then, it becomes easier to understand the title at its fullest depth. Humans slept without safety not only because darkness concealed the unknown, not only because the body surrendered control, and not only because shelter and fire were incomplete. They also slept without safety because the night remained biologically shared. The human body closed its eyes inside an ecosystem that never stopped moving around it. Somewhere near the beginning of our species, that may have been one of the oldest facts of rest. Sleep did not remove a person from the living world. It placed that person into one of the most vulnerable positions possible within it. And whatever safety humans built had to be built inside that shared world, never outside it. That is why the animal presence in this story is not a side detail. It is part of the structure of the night itself, and part of the reason human sleep remained for so long a form of rest that could only ever be partly protected. A night that is only barely manageable for one body may become far more difficult when many kinds of bodies must survive it together. This is one of the most important truths hidden inside the long history of human sleep. It is easy to imagine the past from the viewpoint of a healthy adult alone, lying down and facing darkness as an individual problem. But real human groups were never built from one kind of body. They included infants who needed warmth and constant closeness, children who could not protect themselves, mothers whose sleep was shaped by care, older people whose strength or mobility might be reduced, and injured or weakened individuals whose nights could not be assumed to pass easily. Near the beginning of our species, this would have mattered enormously, because sleep was not being secured inside modern structures built to stabilize temperature, reduce disturbance, and separate vulnerability into private rooms. It was being negotiated collectively in shared spaces, where the needs of one body changed the conditions for the others. This makes the title of the video more human and more precise. Humans slept without safety not only because the environment was uncertain, but because the sleeping group itself contained unequal levels of exposure. The night was never the same night for everyone. An adult in good condition might endure cold, noise, uneven ground, or broken sleep more effectively than a newborn, a child, a nursing mother, or an aging person. A place that was just tolerable for one sleeper might be far less tolerable for another. That means the problem of sleep in deep history cannot be understood simply as the problem of darkness or danger in the abstract. It must also be understood as the problem of protecting fragile bodies when no fully protected sleeping world yet existed. Near the origin point of human life, this would have shaped sleeping arrangements in practical ways. Infants likely needed direct human contact and warmth. Children would have had to remain close to trusted adults. Older individuals may have benefited from nearness, shelter, and group continuity, especially if movement was slower or sleep more easily disturbed. Injured or ill people would have changed the rhythm of a night simply by requiring attention, space, or response. None of this needs to be romanticized. Shared sleep under such conditions may have been crowded, interrupted, and demanding. But that is exactly the point. The sleeping place was not built around an abstract ideal of uninterrupted rest. It was built around the reality that some members of the group were less able to endure exposure than others. In this way, human sleep was social not only because other people were nearby, but because different stages of life pulled the whole group into patterns of care. Even now, a household with a baby does not sleep the same way as a household without one. A room with an elderly person in need of support does not pass through the night in the same manner as a room of strong adults alone. These are modern reminders of something much older. Human sleep has long been shaped by the fact that vulnerability is unevenly distributed across age, condition, and dependency. For most of human history, when safety at night was already partial for everyone, those differences would have mattered even more. Somewhere near the beginning of our species, one of the deepest nighttime realities may have been this. People did not merely sleep beside one another. They slept around the needs of one another. The youngest, weakest, and oldest bodies were not separate from the story of unsafe sleep. They were one of the clearest reasons safety had to be built socially, imperfectly, and again. Every time darkness returned, the night grows more complicated when sleep must protect dependency as well as exhaustion. A strong adult body can sometimes endure discomfort, cold, noise, or broken rest, and still rise again the next day. But a newborn cannot do that in the same way. A small child cannot do that in the same way. A mother whose sleep is tied to feeding, soothing, carrying, and waking cannot experience the night as an isolated personal event. An older person, a sick person, or an injured person may also meet darkness with less margin than others around them. For most of human history, this would have made safe sleep not just difficult, but uneven. Near the beginning of our species, the group did not enter the night with equal powers. It entered with mixed bodies, mixed needs, and mixed capacities to withstand exposure. That is one reason the sleeping place can never be understood as a simple arrangement for adults alone. The true question was always larger. Could the group make the night survivable for those who were least able to endure it? This changes the meaning of safety. Safety was not merely the absence of threat around the strongest members. It was the degree to which the weakest members could remain warm enough, close enough, quiet enough, and reachable enough for the night to pass without crisis. Under such conditions, sleep was unlikely to follow the modern ideal of uninterrupted individual rest. It would have been shaped by response, adjustment, and proximity. Infants need heat, touch, and protection from separation. Young children can wake unpredictably, shift position, cry, or fail to understand danger. Mothers may need to stay near not because of preference, but because distance itself would increase the cost of the night. Older bodies may feel cold more deeply, move more slowly, or need more stable ground and more immediate support. In this sense, the human sleeping group was never simply a cluster of people resting side by side. It was a system built around unequal vulnerability. Near the origin point of human life, that system may have influenced where bodies were placed, how tightly people slept together, how fire was maintained, how shelter was used, and how the center and edges of a sleeping area were organized. We should be careful here. We cannot reconstruct every arrangement with certainty, and prehistoric groups surely varied across landscapes, climates, and ways of life. But the larger logic remains firm. A group containing infants, children, mothers, older individuals, and the weak cannot treat the night as one uniform experience. Their presence forces sleep to become collective in a deeper sense. Even a healthy adult does not merely sleep for personal restoration in such a setting. That adult is part of the protective structure through which other bodies survive the dark. This may be one reason human sleep across deep history was so far from private. The body was not only asking how it could rest, it was also lying within a field of obligations created by kinship, dependence, and the unequal risks of life stages. Modern life still carries faint echoes of this older condition. A parent does not sleep like a person sleeping only for themselves. A household with generations under one roof does not move through the night like a single isolated sleeper. These are not exact windows into prehistory, but they remind us of something ancient and durable. Human sleep has long been organized by care. That care may be one of the deepest reasons the title of the video remains true. Humans slept without safety not only because the environment remained unfinished, but because some members of the group had almost no safety unless others gave up part of their own ease. Somewhere near the beginning of our species, the night may have always contained this quiet burden. Rest was necessary for everyone. But the most vulnerable could not simply be left to the dark. So the group slept in patterns shaped not by comfort alone, but by the constant need to carry weaker bodies through a world that was still only partly softened. A sleeping group is never shaped only by the needs of the strongest body in it. It is shaped by the bodies that are easiest to lose. This may be one of the deepest reasons human sleep remained socially organized for so much of our history. The night did not ask all people for the same strength, and it did not expose all people in the same way. Infants could not regulate themselves like adults. Children could not understand or respond to danger with adult awareness. Mothers often carried the burden of interrupted sleep because the youngest bodies could not survive distance, cold, hunger, or distress on their own. Older individuals, injured people, and the sick would also have faced the night with fewer reserves. Near the beginning of our species, in a world where shelter, warmth, darkness, and ground were only partly managed, these differences would not have been minor. They would have shaped the whole structure of rest. This is the point where unsafe sleep becomes impossible to imagine as an individual experience. The group did not merely include vulnerable people. It had to sleep in a way that took vulnerability into account. A place of rest was therefore not just where tired adults lay down. It was where dependent bodies had to be kept close enough, warm enough, and reachable enough to survive until morning. That requirement changes everything. It means proximity was not optional. It means interruption was not accidental. It means the rhythms of the night were likely bent around care long before sleep became a private, personalized routine. Near the origin point of human history, the body that woke first may not have woken only for itself. The person who shifted closer to the fire, changed position, moved a child, adjusted coverings, or responded to sound may have been participating in something far older than comfort. They were helping maintain the fragile human arrangement through which weaker bodies remained alive in darkness. This is one reason the title of the video reaches beyond environment and into kinship itself. Humans slept without safety not only because the world outside remained uncertain, but because safety inside the group was unevenly distributed. Some people could borrow more safety from others than they could create alone. The sleeping place was therefore not neutral. It was morally and biologically weighted toward dependency. Even now, modern life still preserves small signs of this older truth. People rearrange sleep around babies. Families disturb their own rest for the sick. Older people are often placed where help can reach them more easily. These are not exact copies of prehistoric life, but they carry the same logic. Human sleep has long been organized around the bodies least able to endure exposure. The strong do not sleep as if the weak were absent. They sleep differently because the weak are present. Somewhere near the beginning of our species, that may have been one of the central realities of every night. The sleeping group was not a collection of equal sleepers sharing one darkness. It was a layered human system, bound together by unequal need. That is why the history of unsafe sleep is also a history of care. The youngest, the oldest, the weakest, and the dependent did not merely suffer more from the night. They helped determine how the whole group faced it, and because they could not be separated from human life, sleep itself could never become a purely private act. It remained, for most of our existence, something held together by people who were tired themselves, vulnerable themselves, and yet still required to make room in the dark for bodies even more fragile than their own. That may be one of the quietest reasons safety was always incomplete. Human beings were never only trying to get themselves through the night. They were trying to carry one another through it too. Modern people often imagine good sleep as one long, uninterrupted descent into private stillness. The room is prepared, the body lies down, and the night ideally unfolds as a single enclosed stretch of rest. This image feels so natural now that it is easy to mistake it for the human default. But if we look back across most of human history, that assumption becomes harder to keep. The conditions under which humans slept for the greater part of their existence were not the conditions that encourage perfect continuity, isolation, and evenly protected rest. They were conditions shaped by shared space, changing temperature, uneven ground, noise, darkness, the needs of others, and the incomplete protections of fire and shelter. Under those circumstances, it becomes reasonable to think that ancient sleep was often less private and less consistently uninterrupted than the modern ideal. That does not mean every prehistoric night was fragmented beyond recognition, and it does not mean humans never slept deeply. The evidence does not support such absolute claims. What it does support is a more careful thought. When sleep occurs in settings where the body remains closer to the environment and more dependent on the group, the structure of sleep is likely to reflect that closeness and dependence. Near the beginning of our species, the sleeping human did not enter a sealed personal chamber designed to preserve stable darkness, stable warmth, and stable silence. The sleeper remained near other bodies, near the ground, near the ongoing movements and sounds of the night, and near conditions that could shift before morning. Even a small change in warmth, light, sound, or social movement could matter more in such settings because fewer barriers existed to absorb it. This is one reason it may be more accurate to imagine older human sleep not as one smooth block of private unconsciousness, but as a more social and more environmentally shaped experience. A group sleeping together does not produce the same kind of night as a person sleeping alone in a controlled room. Shared breathing, shifting bodies, the needs of children, the management of fire, changes in cold, and responses to unfamiliar sound all create a different rhythm of rest. That rhythm may still allow recovery, but it is not the same as the highly insulated sleep many people now regard as normal. Near the origin point of human history, sleep may therefore have been more collective in its structure, not just in its setting. A person's night was partly shaped by the nearness, movement, and vulnerability of others. The body rested within a human arrangement, not outside it. This matters because it adds another layer to the title of the video. Humans slept without safety not only because external danger remained possible, but because the conditions that produce long, uninterrupted, highly privatized sleep were themselves historically rare. For most of human history, the body likely rested in a way that remained more exposed to interruption, more responsive to change, and more entangled with other lives. Even now, small traces of that older pattern can still be felt. People often sleep differently in unfamiliar places. They wake more easily when a child stirs, when the room changes temperature, or when an unusual sound enters the night. These modern experiences are not proof of exactly how prehistoric people slept, but they make the deeper logic easier to grasp. Human sleep has never been only an inward event. It has always been shaped by setting, by bodies nearby, and by what the night still allows to reach the sleeper. Somewhere near the beginning of our species, that may have meant that sleep was often less like total withdrawal and more like a managed passage through darkness, shared space, and changing conditions. Not sleeplessness, not constant alarm, but a form of rest whose depth and continuity were likely more uneven, more communal, and more exposed than the sleep many modern people now mistake for timeless human nature. When sleep takes place inside shared vulnerability, it is unlikely to follow the clean modern image of one person disappearing privately from the world for an unbroken stretch of hours. Across most of human history, the body did not rest in conditions built to preserve that kind of smooth continuity. It rested in conditions where warmth shifted, bodies moved, sounds entered, fire changed, and the needs of other people remained close. Under such circumstances, it is reasonable to think that sleep often carried more variation across the night, not because ancient humans were incapable of sleeping, but because the setting around sleep was less insulated from change. Near the beginning of our species, the body still required the same broad biological functions of sleep that it does now. It needed restoration, memory processing, and regular cycles of withdrawal from waking effort. But the way those functions were carried through the night may have looked different when the sleeper remained nearer to ground, nearer to darkness, nearer to others, and nearer to the unfinished world outside a limited shelter. A person sleeping in a shared group cannot entirely avoid the rhythms of the group. Someone turns, someone wakes briefly, a child needs closeness. A sound beyond the sleeping area reaches more than one listener. The fire weakens or brightens. The cold shifts before dawn. None of these changes must be dramatic to matter. A night can remain generally restful while still being more uneven than the modern ideal of sealed solitary sleep suggests. This is why the question is not whether ancient humans slept badly in every sense. The better question is whether their sleep was shaped by conditions that made perfect continuity less likely. The answer, at least in broad outline, seems yes. For most of human history, the environment around the sleeper remained more active in relation to the body. The group remained more physically present. The sleeping place remained more open to temperature, sound, and social movement. Near the origin point of human life, this would have meant that rest was probably not only a personal inward process, but also a shared adaptation to surrounding conditions. The night belonged to many bodies at once, and each body influenced the field in which the others tried to rest. This helps explain why it is safer to speak of ancient sleep as more socially and environmentally patterned rather than to make rigid claims about exact sleep schedules or exact depths of sleep. The evidence does not give us a single universal prehistoric template. Human groups varied across climate, terrain, shelter, and cultural practice, but variation itself does not weaken the larger point. Across that variation, the common condition remained this: sleep was not protected by the kind of stable separation from the outside world that many modern sleepers now inherit. That alone makes a more uneven and more context-sensitive form of rest easier to imagine. Even today, sleep often becomes lighter or more broken when the body shares space with uncertainty. A different room, a colder night, another person moving nearby, or the low need to listen for something can all change how rest unfolds. These are not exact fossils of prehistoric sleep, but they remind us that human sleep still answers to context. Somewhere near the beginning of our species, that dependence on context would have been stronger, not weaker, because fewer artificial layers stood between the sleeper and the changing night. So when we say humans slept without safety, part of what we mean is that sleep likely unfolded under more variable conditions than modern people often imagine. It may have been deep at times and interrupted at others, social rather than private, responsive rather than sealed, not chaotic beyond recovery, but not fully insulated either. The body rested as much as the world allowed, and the world allowed different things from one moment to the next. That is a quieter and more faithful image of ancient sleep than either extreme. It was neither modern comfort placed in the past nor endless alarm with no rest at all. It was a human compromise, shaped by the bodies nearby and by a night that remained only partly under human control. If modern sleep often feels like a private possession, older human sleep was probably something looser and more shared, something the group entered together without any guarantee that the night would leave it undisturbed. This is the most careful way to bring the idea into focus. We do not know one single prehistoric pattern of rest, and we should not pretend to. Human groups lived in different climates, moved through different landscapes, and built different habits around darkness, fire, shelter, and care. But across that variation, one broad truth remains difficult to avoid. For most of human history, the conditions surrounding sleep were not the conditions that produced the strongly separated, highly controlled, deeply private sleep many people now treat as normal. The sleeping body stayed closer to the environment, closer to other bodies, and closer to interruption. That alone is enough to suggest that rest across deep time was often more uneven, more social, and more exposed to the movements of the night. Near the beginning of our species, a person going to sleep did not step into a sealed architecture designed to protect continuity. That person lay down within a living arrangement that could shift before dawn. The fire might change, the air might cool, the ground might press back through the body, a child might wake, someone nearby might move, cough, rise, or return. The sounds beyond the sleeping place might stay familiar for hours and then alter in one brief moment. None of this means that sleep failed. It means only that sleep occurred under conditions where continuity depended on more things remaining stable, and fewer barriers existed when stability broke. That difference may help explain why the long history of human sleep was never simply the story of tired bodies getting the rest they needed in whatever way they pleased. It was the story of bodies taking rest where they could, informs the environment and the group made possible. Some nights may have been calmer, warmer, and more continuous. Others may have been thinner, colder, and more easily broken. Some sleepers may have rested more deeply than others, depending on age, condition, role, and placement within the group. This does not weaken the argument, it strengthens it. It shows that sleep in the older human world was likely not standardized in the way modern sleep increasingly is. It was responsive, it bent around context. Somewhere near the origin point of human life, that responsiveness may have been one of the defining features of rest itself. The body did not command the night to become uniform. It adapted to the night as it came. This is why the title of the video still holds even here, after fire, shelter, ground, darkness, animals, and shared sleeping life have all entered the story. Humans slept without safety because the full conditions of safe, private, uninterrupted rest were historically rare. What most of our ancestors had instead was a set of margins. Enough warmth, enough nearness, enough shelter, enough routine, enough continuity to allow the body to let go for a while. That is not the same as modern security. It is something older and more fragile. Even now, many people still feel faint remnants of it when they sleep badly in an unfamiliar room, when a child's breath changes and wakes them before thought does, when one small sound in the dark reaches deeper than it should. These are not direct fossils of ancient sleep, but they do point toward the same logic. Human rest has always been shaped by more than fatigue. It has been shaped by whether the world around the sleeper feels settled enough, familiar enough, and shared enough to permit surrender. For most of human history, that permission was probably thinner than it is now. Sleep still came, because it had to, but it came as part of a negotiated night, not as a right guaranteed in advance. And perhaps that is the truest image of ancient rest we can keep. Not chaos, not comfort, but a human body closing its eyes inside a world that had grown quieter only by degree and safer only in part. It would be comforting to imagine that once humans settled more permanently, sleep finally crossed a clear line from exposure into safety. Fields replaced wandering, houses replaced temporary shelter, villages replaced scattered camps, and the night, at last, became tame. But history is rarely that simple. Settlement changed the shape of danger far more often than it removed danger itself. For most of human history, after the first more stable communities began to appear, sleep did not move from a dangerous world into a fully protected one. It moved from one kind of vulnerability into another. Near the deeper beginning of our species, unsafe sleep was tied to open ground, mobile life, partial shelter, shared fire, and close contact with the wider landscape. Later, as people lived more often in fixed places, some of those older exposures could indeed be reduced. Walls could become more dependable. Repeated sleeping places could become more structured. Stored materials could make bedding, coverings, and enclosed interiors more common in some settings. Familiarity with one location could deepen. Yet settlement also concentrated bodies, waste, stored food, smoke, animals, insects, and disease in new ways. A stable sleeping place could be more sheltered than open ground. but it could also become more crowded, less ventilated, and more ecologically attractive to small life that thrives near humans. This matters because it prevents the story from becoming too easy. The title of the video is not only about prehistory in the narrowest sense, it is about the larger human condition across most of the past. And across that long stretch, settlement did not end the body's nighttime vulnerability, it rearranged it. A sleeping group in a fixed dwelling could be less exposed to weather from above, and yet more exposed to the consequences of living closely together in enclosed space. Smoke from fire could linger more heavily, air could be less clear, parasites and insects could benefit from stable human presence, food storage could draw rodents, domestic animals, where present, could alter both hygiene and the sensory texture of the night. More people in one place could mean more mutual protection, but also more noise, more disturbance, more disease transmission, and more ways for one body's weakness to affect the others. Near the origin point of settled life, these changes would not have been abstract. They would have reshaped what it meant for a night to feel manageable. The body may have gained more predictable walls, but not a guarantee of clean, quiet, healthy rest. This is one reason modern sleep can mislead when projected backward onto the first villages and early domestic spaces. A fixed sleeping place does not automatically equal a safe sleeping place. Safety depends not only on enclosure, but on air, crowding, dryness, cleanliness, heat, pest, disease, and the ability of a space to buffer bodies from one another's vulnerabilities. Those conditions took a very long time to develop unevenly, and in many places they remained incomplete for most of history. Somewhere between the open, sleeping worlds of earlier humans and the carefully controlled bedrooms of today lies a vast middle ground in which people slept under roofs and still did not possess what modern people would call secure rest. That middle ground may be one of the most important parts of the story. It reminds us that human sleep did not progress in a straight line toward comfort. Each improvement brought new limits, new dependencies, and new forms of risk. So when settled life enters this history, the meaning of the title does not disappear, it changes focus. Humans still slept without safety, not because nothing had improved, but because improvement had not yet become completion. The night was still something the body had to endure inside conditions only partly shaped to protect it. The walls grew thicker in some times and places, but the old human compromise remained. Sleep still arrived before every danger had been solved, and often before the new dangers of shared settled life had even been fully understood. A permanent dwelling can protect the body from wind, rain, and some forms of intrusion, but permanence also allows problems to remain where a mobile life might once have left them behind. This is one of the quiet costs of settled sleep. When humans began to spend more of their nights in repeated built spaces, they gained continuity, but they also inherited accumulation. Smoke could gather night after night. Moisture could linger in the same walls, floors, and corners. Stored food could attract small animals repeatedly instead of only briefly. Waste, refuse, and close human occupation could change the ecology of the sleeping place itself. For most of human history, this would have meant that safety at night remained unfinished even when people slept under more stable roofs. Near the deeper beginning of our species, mobility had carried its own dangers. But movement also prevented some burdens from building up in one place. Settlement altered that pattern. Once sleep happens again and again in the same enclosed areas, certain risks become more predictable but also more persistent. A body can learn the space more fully, yet the space can also become more saturated with the traces of human living. This matters because it reveals how safety is never just about walls. A wall can block weather while doing nothing to remove stale air. A roof can stop rain while still allowing crowding, smoke, pests, and disease to shape the night. A familiar sleeping room can be easier for the mind to accept, yet harder for the body if it remains poorly ventilated, dirty, damp, or full of other living things drawn to human presence. That older reality is easy to miss today because modern interiors often hide the systems that solve these problems. Airflow, drainage, waste removal, pest control, dry flooring, separated animal space, and protected food storage all feel ordinary now in many parts of the world, but across most of history, those layers were incomplete, uneven, or absent. Near the origin point of settled life, a more fixed sleeping place may have felt safer in one sense and less healthy in another. It may have reduced exposure to open darkness while increasing exposure to the consequences of crowding and repetition. That is a very human pattern. The same step that reduces one danger can intensify another. Sleep in settled communities was likely shaped by this exchange. Bodies lay down in places that were more defined than open camps, yet still remained vulnerable to what repeated human presence brings with it. Children, older people, the weak, and the sick would not have been separate from this problem. They would have felt it more sharply. The air of an enclosed place, the movement of illness through close bodies, the persistence of insects or parasites, the difficulty of keeping a sleeping area dry and clean, all of these could fall unevenly across the group. This is why the story of unsafe sleep does not end when houses begin. A house is not the same thing as a healthy sleeping environment, and a settled community is not the same thing as secure rest. Somewhere between the earliest shelters and the modern bedroom lies a long history of sleeping in spaces that were more controlled than the open landscape, yet still deeply exposed to the consequences of human concentration. That middle world is essential to the title of this video. Humans slept without safety not only when the night remained outside them, but also when the conditions of human living brought new forms of nighttime vulnerability indoors. Settlement changed the night by pulling more of life inside human walls, but once more of life moved inside, sleep had to negotiate that crowded interior as well. So the body still did not receive what modern people might call a finished refuge. It received a more stable place perhaps, but not always a cleaner, quieter, healthier, or fully protected one. The old compromise continued, only in a new form. The sleeper no longer lay only against the uncertainty of the open world. The sleeper now also lay inside the accumulated pressures of shared human habitation, where danger had not disappeared, but merely learned to stay in the same place from one night to the next. The history of settled sleep is not the history of danger escaping through the door and never returning. It is the history of danger changing address. Once humans began to spend more nights in fixed places, the body gained forms of protection that mattered greatly. Walls could hold off wind. Roofs could keep out rain. Repeated sleeping areas could become more familiar, more organized, and more closely tied to the routines of the group. These were real gains, and they should not be minimized. Yet the deeper lesson of settled life is that human beings often solved one problem by pulling another problem closer. Near the beginning of our species, unsafe sleep came largely from partial shelter, uncertain darkness, open ecology, and the body's direct exposure to weather and ground. In later settled worlds, some of those pressures could be reduced, but the sleeping place became more entangled with the accumulated burdens of repeated human living. Smoke, crowding, pests, stale air, dampness, waste, noise, and illness did not belong to the open landscape alone. They could now dwell inside the same spaces meant to provide protection. This is why the title of the video remains true even after the rise of houses, villages, and more stable forms of domestic life. Humans still slept without safety, not because walls failed to matter, but because walls never solved the whole problem. A protected structure can lower exposure from outside while leaving the sleeper vulnerable to the conditions created within. That distinction is one of the most important in the entire history of rest. A room may feel more secure than open ground, yet still carry smoke in the air, insects in the bedding, rodents near stored food, disease moving through close bodies, or cold seeping through wet surfaces. A permanent sleeping place can be easier to return to and harder to truly clean. Familiarity can calm the mind while accumulation continues to burden the body. Near the origin point of settled human life, this would have meant that the night no longer pressed only from outside. It also rose from the material reality of life together indoors. The sleeping place became denser with human traces, and those traces could shape rest in ways older mobile life had distributed across movement. This is not a contradiction. It is the normal pattern of human history. Each step toward greater control often creates new forms of dependence. The same communities that made sleeping places more stable also made them more ecologically concentrated. The same walls that narrowed the weather could trap smoke and stale air. The same closeness that protected the vulnerable could help illness and parasites persist. The same routines that made sleep more predictable could also make burdens more permanent. Somewhere between deep prehistory and the modern bedroom, this became one of the central truths of human nights. Safety did not arrive all at once. It thickened unevenly, over very long spans of time, and often only for some people in some places. For most of human history, even when the sleeper lay under a roof, the body still rested within conditions that had not yet become fully protective, hygienic, private, or quiet by modern standards. That is why settled life does not close the argument of this video. It broadens it. It reminds us that unsafe sleep was never just a problem of wilderness. It was also a problem of human concentration, human architecture, and the slow, unfinished process of making built spaces truly habitable at night. The body continued to sleep before the work was complete. It continued to lie down in places that were safer than before, and still not safe enough to erase vulnerability. In that sense, the rise of settled life did not end the old human compromise. It gave the compromise a new form. Sleep remained possible, necessary, and imperfect, carried through one more kind of world that humans had made for themselves, but not yet fully made safe. What many modern people call a normal night would have been extraordinary for most of human history. A private room, a raised bed, a dry floor, controlled warmth, reduced insects, stable walls, softer materials, and the expectation that the night should belong almost entirely to one sleeping person and not ancient human defaults. They are layered achievements. They were built gradually, unevenly, and very late. This matters because the feeling of safe sleep now arrives so quietly that it can seem natural, almost biological, as if human beings were always meant to close a door, dim a light, and disappear into uninterrupted rest. But if we look back toward the longer beginning of our species, the opposite picture appears. For most of human existence, the body did not sleep inside completed protection. It slept inside partial arrangements against darkness, cold, ground, animals, crowding, and the needs of others. The modern sleeping environment is therefore not simply a place where humans rest. It is the result of thousands of years spent slowly building distance from the conditions under which human sleep first evolved. A bed is part of that distance. It lifts the body from the ground. A wall is part of that distance. It narrows wind, sound, and open approach. A roof is part of that distance. It separates sleep from direct weather. Dry flooring, stored bedding, cleaner interiors, waste removal, screened openings, and safer food storage are all part of that same long movement. They do not only make sleep comfortable, they make it less entangled with the immediate pressures of the night. Near the origin point of human life, those pressures were not background inconveniences. They were central conditions of rest. So, when modern people lie down in a room that is familiar, enclosed, and predictable, they are not merely enjoying comfort. They are inhabiting a historically unusual state in which many of the old negotiations of sleep have already been handled in advance. This is one reason the title of the video may begin to sound less like a dramatic statement and more like a quiet historical observation. Humans slept without safety for most of their history because the systems that now make sleep feel safe had not yet been fully built. Even when some of those systems began to appear, they were incomplete, unevenly distributed, and often available only to certain groups in certain places. Private sleeping space is a good example. Today, many people expect separation as part of normal rest. But across the longer human past, sleep was far more often shared, crowded, interrupted, and arranged around kinship, vulnerability, labor, and local conditions. Temperature control offers another example. Modern sleepers often assume a room should remain within a comfortable range through the night. Yet, for most of human history, bodies had to borrow warmth from others, from coverings, from fire, from shelter, and from habit. Protection from insects, parasites, rodents, and dampness is another recent layer that many people now treat as basic. Historically, it was not basic. It was something slowly won. Somewhere between the earliest human nights and the present lies a long accumulation of barriers between the sleeper and the world. That accumulation is what modern sleep often feels like from the inside. Not history, but normality. Yet it is history. It is built history pressing quietly around the body every night. This does not mean all modern people now sleep safely, or that safe sleep has been evenly shared across societies. Many still do not. But in broad human terms, the expectation that sleep should be private, protected, soft, dry, and relatively uninterrupted is very recent. That expectation itself is part of the story. It reveals how far the human sleeping environment has moved from its starting point. The old body remains the same body in many essentials, still needing darkness, still vulnerable in sleep, still shaped by noise, warmth and nearness. What changed most was the world around that body. And for most of human history, that world had not yet become the kind of place that could truly promise the sleeper safety before rest began. Modern safe sleep is not a single invention. It is a stack of solved problems so familiar that many people no longer feel them as history. A dry floor means the body does not have to negotiate moisture rising from below. A raised bed means the sleeper is no longer pressed directly against the ground. A stable roof means rain and falling cold no longer enter the night in the same way. A door means approach becomes narrower and more legible. Cleaner stored bedding means softness is no longer borrowed only from plant matter, skins, or temporary coverings. Better control of waste, food, smoke, pests, and indoor air means the sleeping place becomes less attractive to some of the living pressures that once shared human nights. Even the expectation of silence, or near silence, is historically unusual. For most of human history, sleep was shaped by other bodies, other needs, other sounds, and the unfinished conditions of the environment. That is why the modern bedroom can be so misleading. It does not merely offer comfort. It hides the number of separate historical burdens that had to be reduced before comfort could begin to feel natural. Near the beginning of our species, those burdens still touched the body much more directly. Sleep did not unfold within a pre-secured zone. It unfolded inside a world only partly arranged to support it. The ground still acted on the body, darkness still limited knowledge. Other humans still made sleep possible and difficult at the same time. Shelter still reduced exposure without ending it. Fire still required tending. The wider animal world still remained close. Later settled life reduced some of those pressures while creating others of its own. So the modern experience of sleep is not simply what the human body naturally wanted all along and always possessed. It is what happens when many long human struggles against cold, dampness, crowding, interruption, smoke, insects, and uncertainty are gradually pushed outward, away from the sleeper, by architecture, materials, habits, and systems. This is why private safe sleep is historically recent in the deeper sense. Not because no one ever slept well before modern times, and not because all modern sleepers now enjoy equal protection, but because the expectation of stable individual safety during sleep depends on layers that most humans for most of history did not have. A person who lies down today in a quiet enclosed room is often resting inside centuries of accumulated distance from the original conditions of human rest. That distance can be measured not only in walls and beds, but in assumptions. We now assume that night should be dry, warm enough, relatively clean, relatively still, and protected from intrusion. We assume that sleep belongs to the individual body and that interruptions are exceptions rather than part of the structure of rest. We assume that the sleeping place should already be prepared before fatigue arrives. These assumptions are powerful precisely because they feel invisible. Yet if we turn back toward the beginning of human life, they begin to disappear one by one. Then sleep looks different. It becomes something the body attempts inside partial protection, not after full protection has been secured. Somewhere between those two worlds lies the long construction of the modern night. It was built through shelter becoming stronger, sleeping surfaces becoming more separated from earth, interiors becoming drier and cleaner, communities learning better ways to manage waste and food, boundaries becoming more dependable, and privacy becoming more available to some people in some places. None of this came all at once, and none of it was evenly shared. But taken together, these changes transformed what sleep could feel like. They did not change the human body into a new species of sleeper. They changed how much of the old world still reached that body after dark. That is the quiet historical turning point. For most of human history, the world still reached the sleeper too easily. In the more recent human world, more and more of that world was held back before sleep began. And from inside that achievement, the modern person can easily forget how unusual it is to expect the night to protect them before they close their eyes. The modern night often feels quiet, contained, and predictable But that feeling is the result of a very long human effort to reduce how much of the outside world can reach a sleeping body. When a person now lies down inside a closed room, many forms of exposure have already been pushed outward. The ground no longer presses directly into the body. Rain no longer changes the sleeping surface. Most insects are kept at a distance. The air is less likely to carry smoke from an open fire. Food is stored away from the place of rest. The presence of animals is usually separated from the place where people sleep. Even sound is often softened by walls, distance, and materials designed to absorb it. Each of these small separations may seem ordinary when taken alone, but together they form something historically unusual. They form a sleeping environment where many of the pressures that once shaped human nights are no longer allowed to reach the sleeper in their original form. Near the beginning of our species, those pressures were not distant. They were part of the ordinary conditions under which rest had to occur. The ground, the air, the bodies nearby, the living world outside a shelter, and the changing rhythms of darkness all remained close enough to influence how deeply a person could sleep. Over thousands of years, human societies slowly learned how to move those influences farther away. Better building materials, more stable floors, improved bedding, stronger walls, controlled openings, more careful storage of food, improved sanitation, and greater separation between humans and animals all helped narrow the number of forces that could reach the sleeping body. These changes did not happen everywhere at the same time, and they did not arrive suddenly. They appeared gradually, unevenly, and often only for certain groups or regions. Yet taken together, they reshaped the meaning of night. The body no longer had to negotiate with as many external conditions once sleep began. The sleeping place itself began to hold more of the protection that earlier humans had to create through closeness, vigilance, and habit. This transformation is one of the quiet revolutions of human history. It changed how sleep felt without changing the biological need for sleep itself. The human body that rests today is still a body shaped by much older environments, but the world around that body has been reorganized. A modern sleeping space often stands between the sleeper and many of the environmental pressures that once reached directly into the night. Because this protection now surrounds the body before sleep begins, the act of resting can feel more private and more secure than it once did. Yet remembering the longer human story changes how that security appears. It becomes easier to see that the peaceful modern night is not the natural starting point of human life. It is the outcome of many small human efforts layered over generations. Somewhere near the beginning of our species, sleep happened without those layers. People lay down in spaces where the boundary between the human body and the surrounding world remained thinner. Shelter helped, fire helped, closeness helped, but the night was still shared with weather, animals, sound, and the unfinished environment around them. That earlier condition lasted for most of the time our species has existed. Only gradually did the sleeping place begin to gather enough protection to shield the body from so many external forces. When people today expect sleep to occur inside quiet, dry, and enclosed spaces, they are living inside the result of that slow construction. The night feels safer because much of the old world has already been pushed outside the walls. But the deeper history reminds us that those walls are recent in human terms. For most of our existence, the sleeping body remained closer to the world it came from. And that closeness is the reason the long human story can still be described with a simple truth. For most of human history, sleep arrived before safety had fully been built. When the long history of human sleep is viewed as a whole, one quiet truth begins to appear again and again. The body almost never waited for the world to become completely safe before it rested. Sleep usually arrived earlier than safety. It arrived in partial shelters, beside fading fires, within crowded groups, under uncertain roofs, and inside environments where many pressures still remained unfinished. This pattern stretches from the earliest human nights through later settlements and into the long centuries before the modern sleeping room slowly took shape. The deeper story is therefore not about a sudden moment when humans finally became safe enough to sleep. It is about a species that learned to sleep anyway, inside conditions that were only partly arranged to protect it. Near the beginning of our species, the body lay down close to ground, weather, animals, darkness, and the needs of other people. Later generations added shelter, fire management, familiar places, and more stable communities. Still later, walls grew stronger, floors rose above damp earth, bedding improved, air became cleaner in some spaces, and the sleeping area gradually separated from food, animals, and waste. These changes mattered deeply. They made sleep less exposed in many places and for many people. Yet the long pattern remained the same. Rest did not wait for the world to become perfect. It took place while the world was still in the process of being shaped. This may be one of the most revealing features of human life. Sleep is not optional. A body cannot postpone it indefinitely until every danger disappears. At some point, fatigue becomes stronger than caution. The eyes close even when the night is unfinished. That biological fact forced humans to invent ways of managing vulnerability rather than eliminating it. Fire was one of those inventions. Shared sleeping groups were another. Shelter, routine, and familiarity helped narrow uncertainty. Later architecture, sanitation, and private rooms would extend that effort much further. But all of these belong to the same deeper pattern. Human beings learning to build margins of safety around a biological need that cannot be delayed forever. Somewhere near the origin point of our species, this must have been understood not as an idea but as a rhythm of living. Each day demanded effort. Each night demanded rest. Between those two demands stood the unfinished world. People could shape that world a little, borrow warmth from others, gather material for shelter, keep fire alive, choose ground carefully, and sleep close to those they trusted. Yet none of those actions fully removed danger. They only made the night manageable enough for the body to let go for a while. This helps explain why the title of this video is not a claim about constant terror or sleeplessness. Humans did sleep. They had to. The point is quieter than that. They slept while safety remained incomplete. That condition lasted for most of our history, because the technologies, buildings, habits, and social arrangements that now surround modern sleep took an immense span of time to accumulate. Even today, those protections are not evenly shared across the world. Many people still sleep in environments closer to the older human condition than to the protected modern bedroom. That fact reminds us that the story is not entirely finished. Yet even in places where sleep has become quieter and more secure, the deeper human pattern remains visible. The body that lies down tonight still carries the legacy of countless earlier nights when rest had to occur under less certain conditions. Somewhere far back in time, long before rooms were silent and walls were thick, the human species learned a difficult balance. It learned that survival required both vigilance and surrender. Wakefulness guarded the day, but sleep still claimed its place in the dark, and the body accepted that bargain again and again, closing its eyes not because safety had finally been guaranteed, but because life required rest even in a world that was never fully finished. Perhaps the most modern illusion about sleep is that it belongs entirely to the individual. We think of rest as a private possession, something achieved by the body alone once the room is right, the noise is low, and the door is closed. But the longer human story suggests something more humbling. Sleep was never only an individual act. It was held up by other humans, by chosen places, by fragile routines, by fire, by shelter, by memory, and by the endless human labor of reducing danger without ever fully defeating it. Near the beginning of our species, no one could simply create perfect safety for themselves at night. The body had to borrow safety from a circle of conditions larger than itself. That may be why the history of sleep is also a history of dependence. A child survived the night because someone remained near. A mother slept differently because another body needed her before dawn. An older person, an injured person, a weakened person often needed the sleeping group to absorb part of their vulnerability. Even the strongest adult did not truly sleep alone in the deeper human sense, because the group, the fire, the shelter, and the familiar arrangement of bodies all helped carry the cost of the night. This does not make ancient sleep sentimental. Shared sleep could be crowded, interrupted, uncomfortable, and demanding. But it was precisely within those imperfect arrangements that human beings made rest possible for one another. Somewhere near the origin point of our species, this may have been one of the quiet foundations of human social life. Long before philosophy, long before formal institutions, long before the language of protection became abstract, people were already engaged in one of its oldest forms. They were trying to get one another through the night. That is a deep human act. It asks very little from theory and everything from repeated practice. Keep the child warm, Keep the fire alive. Choose the driest place. Stay close enough to wake if needed. Accept a broken night so someone weaker can survive until morning. In that sense, sleep was not only where human vulnerability became visible, it was also where human care became visible. And this may be the most valuable lesson the title can leave behind. To say that most of human history slept without safety is not only to describe danger, it is to describe the long human effort to build enough protection for rest before perfect protection existed. The species did not wait for ideal conditions, it created partial ones. It did not abolish uncertainty, it learned to soften it together. Even now, the modern room still rests on that older pattern. It may seem that the sleeper needs only a mattress and a locked door, but behind that quiet scene lies a vast inheritance of shared labour, architecture, custom, maintenance, medicine, and social order. Safe sleep remains, in a deeper sense, something no individual creates alone. Somewhere far back at the beginning of our story, the body first learned to close its eyes inside circles of borrowed safety. Firelight, bodies nearby, shelter overhead, familiar sounds, and the patience of those who accepted incomplete rest so others might rest at all. That world was harsher than ours in many ways, but it also reveals something modern life can easily hide. Sleep has always been one of the places where human beings depend most completely on conditions they do not fully control. Perhaps that is why the sleeping body can still feel so exposed, even in a quiet room. Perhaps beneath all the walls and soft materials, some older recognition remains. Rest is never just surrender to comfort. It is trust placed in a world that is, even now, only partly held back. And if that has always been true, then maybe the deepest human achievement was never creating perfect safety at night, but learning how to make enough of it, together, for sleep to come anyway. There is a quiet irony in the long history of human sleep. The body that rests tonight inside a calm room is not very different from the body that once lay down on bare ground under uncertain darkness. The same need remains. The same surrender remains. The same moment when the mind loosens its hold on the world still arrives in exactly the same biological way, yet the world around that body has changed more than the body itself. Over thousands of years, humans slowly built distance between sleep and the many pressures that once shaped every night. Fire widened the circle of visibility. Shelter softened the wind. Communities gathered bodies together so that no one faced the darkness entirely alone. Later generations added stronger walls, cleaner floors, better bedding, safer storage of food, and ways to manage waste and air. None of these appeared suddenly, and none of them solved the problem of sleep all at once. But together they created something remarkable. A world where, in some places, the sleeping body no longer has to negotiate directly with as many dangers as it once did. When people today close their eyes in a quiet room, it may feel as though safety simply exists around them. The deeper history shows something else. Safety was constructed piece by piece across generations who never fully possessed it themselves. Most of the people who helped build the modern night still slept in conditions far closer to the older human world. They improved walls that were still thin, built shelters that were still imperfect, shared rooms that were still crowded, and raised children in nights that were not yet fully calm. They worked toward a safer sleep they themselves rarely experienced in complete form. That effort is one of the quiet inheritances of human life. Every bed, every dry floor, every protected roof, every separated room carries a trace of that long human labor. Yet the deeper lesson of this history is not only about progress. It is also about perspective. The human body still sleeps by surrendering control. Even in the safest environments, sleep requires trust in conditions we cannot monitor once consciousness fades. That vulnerability has never completely disappeared, and perhaps it never should. It reminds us that rest is not an act of domination over the world. It is an act of balance within it. Somewhere near the beginning of our species, humans first learned that balance. They learned to close their eyes while the night remained unfinished. They accepted that safety might never be perfect, yet rest was still necessary for life to continue. That understanding allowed the species to survive through thousands of generations in environments that were far harsher than most people experience today. And it also left behind a quiet message for the present. The peaceful night that surrounds many modern sleepers is not the natural starting point of human life. It is the result of long collective effort. Recognizing that history does not diminish comfort, it deepens gratitude for it. It reminds us that safe sleep is not something the human body created alone, but something societies slowly built together across time. Perhaps that is the final thought to carry into the dark. When a person lies down tonight, they are participating in a human rhythm far older than walls or beds, a body closing its eyes, a world only partly held back, and generations before us who made that fragile moment a little safer than it once was. The question that remains is a simple one, without a final answer. If sleep has always depended on the world we build around one another, what kind of nights will the humans of the future inherit from the ones who sleep today?